I used to think that being alone was the safest place a person could be. After all, nobody can hurt you if they can't reach you. Nobody can surprise you if there's no one else around. For years, I believed that. I built my routines around it, guarded my space like it was a vault, and avoided the chaos of people as if that alone could keep me whole. But if you stay alone long enough, you learn something unpleasant. It's not always other people who break the silence. Sometimes the silence itself cracks. Sometimes it lets things in. My name's Michael Harlow. I'm a wildlife photographer. I make my living crouching in the brush, waiting for hours to capture the right frame of a hawk's wings or the quick dart of a fox. It's quiet work, and for a while it was exactly what I needed. The winter of 2021, though, was different. A year earlier, my wife Emily had left me. We'd been married 11 years. She said I'd changed after the burglary, that I'd stopped sleeping, stopped laughing, started checking the lock so often it felt like I was keeping her prisoner too. She wasn't wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was always just about to happen. My therapist told me I should try a change of scenery, somewhere away from my apartment, my routines, my fears. Go where the only thing you'll hear at night is the wind, she said. Nature has a way of untangling the knots in us. That's how I ended up signing a 4-week lease for a house at the end of a winding road in Asheville, North Carolina. The address was 56 Birch Hollow. Fully furnished, quiet as a tomb, and surrounded by bare winter trees that rattled like dry bones when the wind picked up. I told myself this was therapy, a month to photograph birds, walk the trails, and maybe, just maybe, remember what it felt like to breathe without listening for footsteps. The first day passed easily. I unpacked, set up my camera gear on the back porch, and spent hours with a cup of coffee in hand, snapping photos of chickadees and cardinals picking at the feeder. By the time the sun went down, I almost believed I'd made the right choice. That changed at 9:47 p.m. I was sitting at the kitchen table reviewing photos on my laptop when I heard a sound from upstairs, a slow, deliberate creak, like weight shifting on old floorboards. I froze, listening. The landlord had told me I'd be the only one here. No neighbors close enough to wander in, no shared walls. Probably the house settling, I muttered to myself. But the words didn't quite stick. I grabbed my flashlight and made a slow circuit of the upstairs rooms. Empty, nothing out of place. I told myself again it was just the cold tightening the wood, but I slept with the bedroom door locked that night. The next morning I noticed something odd. I was making coffee when my socks picked up dampness from the hallway floor. I looked down. Muddy footprints. Small ones, not mine. Barefoot, maybe a child's size. They started near the base of the stairs and ended halfway to the guest bedroom. I took photos of them on my phone, intending to send them to the landlord, but every time I tried to attach them, the upload failed with some error code I'd never seen. Eventually I gave up, cleaned the floor, and tried to forget about it. But that day marked the start of other disturbances. Little things at first. A framed photograph in the living room turned face down overnight. My camera tripod, which I'd left beside the couch, appeared 3 feet closer to the hallway the next morning. A glass I'd left in the sink ended up neatly drying on the rack. I told myself it was me, distracted, maybe moving things without thinking. But by the third night, my grip on that explanation was thin. A winter storm rolled in after dark. Power flickered, and the house seemed to shrink in the cold. Around 11:12 p.m., I heard a soft tapping from the guest bedroom, steady like fingernails brushing glass. I padded down the hallway, flashlight in hand. The room was empty, window locked. I was turning to leave when something caught my eye in the mirror at the end of the hall. A small figure stood in the guest bedroom doorway behind me, pale, motionless, watching. I spun around. The doorway was empty. Sleep was out of the question after that. I sat up until dawn, the flashlight on the table beside me, every light in the house burning. The following morning, I set up my motion-activated wildlife camera in the hallway outside the guest bedroom. The night vision would pick up anything moving after dark. It was the same setup I'd used dozens of times in the field, good enough to catch a fox slipping through the shadows. When I checked the footage the next day, my hands went cold. At 3:08 a.m., the guest bedroom door opened slowly. A thin, pale figure stepped into the hallway. The proportions were wrong for an adult. Too slight, too short. It stopped, turned its head toward my closed bedroom door, and then in the space between two frames it vanished. I called the landlord. My voice was steady at first, but it started to crack as I described what I'd seen. He was quiet for a long moment before saying, "You probably should have been told this before. The house used to belong to a family. Their son went missing in '98, never found. That room was his." I asked him if he was serious. He said he was. Penalty. "If you're uncomfortable, you can leave early." No, I told him I'd think about it, but deep down I already knew I wasn't leaving. Not yet. By the time the sun went down that night, I'd made up my mind. If I ran now, I'd never stop wondering. I'd go back to Asheville, crawl into bed, and replay that hallway footage over and over, asking myself if it was a trick of the light, a glitch, or something worse. I'd had enough of running after the break-in. Maybe it was stupid, maybe it was dangerous, but I wasn't leaving until I understood what I was dealing with. Still, my nerves weren't made of steel. Before it got fully dark, I locked every window, deadbolted both doors, and pushed the dining chair under the knob of the guest bedroom. I even slid a heavy suitcase in front of it just in case. The rest of the evening was uneventful, though uneventful in that house felt like waiting for a bomb to go off. Every gust of wind rattled the siding like knuckles on a door. The occasional flicker of power made the shadows stretch and twist. I kept the wildlife camera in place, facing the guest bedroom door. Sometime after midnight, I drifted into a shallow, uneasy sleep. I woke to the sound of wood scraping on wood. It took a few seconds to place it. The chair. It was sliding across the floor. I sat up, heart pounding. My phone said 2:57 a.m. The sound stopped. I grabbed the flashlight, flipped it on, and stepped into the hallway. The guest bedroom door was wide open. The chair was back by the dining table. I felt my hands go clammy on the flashlight. I'd braced myself for something standing in that doorway. A man, a child, anything. But there was only darkness inside. The next morning, I reviewed the camera footage. At 2:55, the door handle began to turn, slowly. No hand on it, no visible force. At 2:56, the door eased open, the chair slid aside, and the camera fizzled into static until 3:02. When the picture came back, the door was open and the hallway empty. I wanted answers. The landlord had been reluctant before, but I called him again. "You didn't tell me everything," I said. "Mr. Harlow," he replied, "it out short term for a reason. What's in that house doesn't bother anyone who leaves it alone. I rent, that's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting." His tone ended the conversation. That day I started leaving a voice recorder running in the hallway. I also set my tripod camera to take still photos every 30 seconds between midnight and 4 a.m. The first night, the recorder picked up nothing but the hum of the refrigerator. The second night was different. At 1:43 a.m., a faint knocking started on the recorder. Irregular, like someone gently tapping a wall from inside. It went on for almost 3 minutes. At 2:10, there was a whisper. Too soft to make out words, but definitely a voice. The photos were stranger. 2 were just black, as if the lens cap had been on, but I hadn't touched it. In the third, the hallway was empty except for a pale blur near the guest bedroom door. The blur had a shape to it, a suggestion of shoulders, a head tilted slightly to one side. By the fourth night, I was starting to feel like I wasn't alone even in daylight. I'd catch a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye while making coffee. My tripod would be a few inches off from where I'd left it. A throw blanket folded on the couch would be draped over the armrest instead. I was tired, strung out, but I wasn't ready to quit. That night I made a decision I'm not sure I'd make again. I left the guest bedroom door open on purpose. I sat on the couch in the living room with only one lamp lit, camera pointed toward the hallway. Midnight passed. 1 o'clock. The wind howled outside, but the house stayed still. Then at 1:27 a.m., I heard soft footsteps upstairs, not hurried, slow, measured, coming from the direction of the guest bedroom. I raised the camera and pressed the shutter as the sound reached the top of the stairs. What stepped into view wasn't clear in the half-light, but I saw enough. Small, pale, dressed in something loose and dark. It stopped halfway into the hallway, turned its head toward me, and smiled. I didn't take another photo. I couldn't. My hands had gone rigid around the camera. It turned away and walked back toward the guest bedroom, vanishing into shadow without a sound. I stayed awake until dawn, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. By the 5th night, the house had stopped feeling like a place I was renting. It felt like a place I was trespassing in. The difference was subtle, but it was there in the air. Heavy, still, like a room where someone had been holding their breath for hours. I kept telling myself I had one more night to stick it out. Then I'd pack up and leave. That afternoon, I did something reckless. I went into the guest bedroom for the first time since arriving. The air in there was colder than the rest of the house. The walls were bare except for a single nail above the bed where a picture might have hung. The bedspread was faded, patterned with little green leaves. I stood there for a while, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. But as I turned to leave, I noticed the closet door was ajar. Inside, the space was empty except for an old wooden chair. The seat was scuffed, worn smooth in the middle. I don't know why, but the sight of that chair made the hairs on my neck rise. I closed the closet and left the door wide open behind me. That night, I didn't bother with cameras. I didn't want to watch later. I wanted to see it, if it came, with my own eyes. Around 2:40 a.m., I woke to the sound of breathing, not my own. Slow, steady, coming from the hallway. I sat up in bed. The door to my room was closed, but the breathing didn't stop. Then the doorknob began to turn. My chest tightened. Every muscle locked. The knob twisted once, twice, then stilled. After a long pause, the sound of footsteps padded away toward the guest bedroom. I didn't move until the first light of dawn seeped through the curtains. That morning, I packed my gear, my clothes, everything I'd brought. I left the keys in the mailbox without knocking on the landlord's door. It wasn't until 2 weeks later, back home in my apartment, that I saw the last piece of the puzzle. I was sorting through my wildlife photos from Asheville when I found one that didn't belong. It was taken inside the guest bedroom at night. I hadn't taken it. I hadn't even left my bedroom that night. The photo showed the pale figure sitting cross-legged on the bed, head tilted, eyes fixed on the camera. The smile was small but wrong, the kind of smile that feels like it's meant for someone else but lands on you instead. I deleted the photo. It didn't help. The image stayed with me anyway. I've been in plenty of empty woods, plenty of remote cabins, plenty of lonely roads since then. I still take pictures, still crouch for hours waiting for a bird to appear. But I never stay in houses I don't know, and I always keep the doors closed at night. Because sometimes it isn't about whether you believe in ghosts. Sometimes it's about whether something believes in you. Safety isn't just about where you are, it's about what you let in. Some doors, once opened, never truly close again. I used to tell myself I liked living alone. People would give me that raised eyebrow look when I said it, like I was either fiercely independent or quietly broken. The truth was less glamorous. I liked control. I liked knowing if the dishes were in the sink, I was the one who put them there. If a light was left on, it was because I left it on. After what happened 2 years earlier, a mugging in a grocery store parking lot, control was my way of keeping the world at arm's length. That night in April, Charleston was wrapped in the kind of damp heat that made even your skin feel tired. My little second-floor apartment sat a block from the Ashley River, in an old brick building that still had the bones of a hotel from the 70s. The place had charm if you squinted hard enough, but most days it was just creaky floors, windows that rattled in the wind, and an elevator that wheezed like it was doing me a favor. I'd been there 6 months. In that time, I'd developed my own rituals. 3 locks on the front door, pepper spray on the coffee table, a habit of glancing over my shoulder even in the hallway. My sister Julia teased me about it whenever we Skyped. "You live like you're in witness protection," she'd say. But she wasn't the one who'd had hands come out of the dark once. That evening, I was still at my desk at 9, polishing the last pages of a manuscript for a client who paid well enough to justify my sore eyes. Outside, the wind was getting pushy, bending the palms in the parking lot and rattling the sliding glass door that led to my balcony. The forecast had promised thunderstorms, and Charleston doesn't do storms halfway. At 9:15, my doorbell rang. I didn't move at first. The building's front entrance locked automatically at 8, which meant whoever it was either lived here or got buzzed in, and I wasn't expecting anyone. I crept to the peephole. The hallway beyond was empty. Dim yellow light, faded wallpaper, and the low electric hum from the fixture overhead. No footsteps retreating, no voices, just stillness. I waited there longer than I'd like to admit before backing away. The skin between my shoulders was tight, like it knew better. "Probably kids," I muttered. But the rain started around 10. Not a soft drizzle, the heavy, relentless kind that turns streets into mirrors. The sound filled the apartment, made it feel smaller. I was halfway through reheating pasta when I remembered the folding chair I'd left out on the balcony that morning. The wind could easily knock it over, send it clanging into the rail. I slid the glass door open and stepped out into the wet air. The metal rail was slick under my hands. Across the street lamp outside the laundromat flickered, buzzing faintly in the downpour. And that's when I saw him. A man stood under the lamp. Tall, lean, head tilted back, not toward the sky, but toward me. Even from that distance, I could feel the directness of it, like he'd been standing there long enough to forget to pretend otherwise. His clothes clung to him in the rain, dark and shapeless. He didn't move. I froze, fingers clamped on the chair. A flash of lightning cracked the night open, and for the shortest fraction of a second, I thought I saw the corner of his mouth lift. By the time my eyes adjusted again, the space beneath the street lamp was empty. I went inside fast, locking the balcony door until I heard the latch click. My phone was already in my hand. "Rachel." Some guy was just staring up at my balcony. Super creepy. "Julia. Do you want me to call Mom or stay on the phone with you?" "Rachel. No, just locking up. Probably nothing." I told myself that, over and over. But long after I killed the lights, I was still lying there, listening to the rain and thinking about the way he hadn't moved. Not a step, not a twitch. At 2:04 a.m., I woke to the sound of water inside my apartment. It wasn't the rain I heard this time. Not exactly. It was slower, deliberate. A drip, drip, drip that didn't belong to the weather outside. I pushed the blanket aside and sat up, holding my breath. My bedroom door was cracked just enough for me to see a sliver of the living room. It was dark out there, but I could make out the faint silver glow from the balcony glass. The sound was coming from that direction. I padded barefoot down the short hall, every step slower than the last. That's when I saw it. Small, irregular puddles dotting the hardwood. They stretched from the sliding balcony door toward the kitchen. At first I thought maybe the rain had blown in somehow, but the glass was shut tight. And the puddles weren't clear. They were murky, with bits of grit and faint smears like someone had tracked them in. I crouched down, my throat tightening. In the middle of each puddle was the faint outline of a bare foot. The toes, the arch, the heel, each print more distinct than the last, leading farther into the apartment. I backed up, my pulse hammering in my ears. My phone was on the kitchen counter, but that meant stepping past the prints. No way. I bolted into my bedroom, locked the door, and grabbed the phone from my nightstand. My fingers were shaking as I dialed 911. "This is Charleston County Emergency," a calm female voice answered. "Emergency? What's your, I think..." My throat caught. "I think someone's in my apartment." She asked for my address, which I gave in a rush. Please send someone." "I'm in my bedroom. The door's locked." "Stay on the line with me, Rachel. Officers are on their way. Do not leave your room." I sat on the floor, my back against the bed, pepper spray in one hand, phone in the other. My breathing was loud in my ears. And then, the sound of a floorboard groaning. Close. Too close. I pressed the phone harder to my ear. "He's here," I whispered. "Can you describe what you hear?" she asked. "Someone's..." My voice died in my throat. Slow, deliberate breathing. Not mine. Just on the other side of the door. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen, with the dispatcher's voice grounding me in that dim, suffocating room. Seconds felt like minutes. Minutes felt like hours. The breathing stopped. I thought maybe he'd moved away. I strained to hear any hint of footsteps, but the silence was worse. Then came a knock. Not on my door, but on the window behind me. I bit down on a scream. My room faced the parking lot. We were on the second floor. Whoever it was had to be standing on the narrow ledge outside. The dispatcher's tone shifted. "Rachel, stay exactly where you are. The officers are pulling in now." A flicker of red and blue light bled through the blinds. Relief surged in me so hard it almost made me dizzy. I stayed where I was until I heard the pounding knock on my front door and the unmistakable command, "Charleston Police, open up!" 2 officers swept the apartment. They didn't find anyone. I wanted to believe that meant I'd imagined it, but then the taller officer called me over to the spare bedroom, a room I never used. Inside, on the floor, was a neatly folded blanket. Beside it, a couple of grocery bags with unopened food. An empty water bottle sat tipped on its side. The officer crouched, studying the scene. "Looks like someone's been living here," he said, his voice grim. "Nothing's missing, though. This isn't about stealing. Probably watching you." That sentence hit me harder than the footprints had. They took my statement and suggested I stay with someone for the night. But it was 3 a.m., and I didn't want to knock on a friend's door looking like a ghost. So I sat on my couch with every light in the place on until the sun came up. I moved out within the week. The move was fast, almost frantic. I didn't even pack neatly, just shoved clothes into garbage bags, taped boxes without labeling them, left dishes in the sink for the cleaning crew. My landlord didn't ask questions when I said I wouldn't be renewing. He just nodded, told me he'd heard about some strange things in the building before. That was enough confirmation for me. I found a 1-bedroom on the other side of town, newer building, gated parking, keypad entry. It cost more than I wanted to spend, but after that night, I would have paid triple just to sleep without looking over my shoulder. The first week there, I didn't unpack much. I told myself it was because I was busy with work, but the truth was, I wasn't sure I wanted to settle in. That nagging thought, "It's easier to leave if you need to," still lingered. One Saturday afternoon, almost 2 months after the move, I decided to make myself unpack properly. I started with clothes, pulling crumpled shirts and sweaters from one of the large trash bags I'd used in the rush. Halfway down, my hands froze. It was a Polaroid photograph, the old square kind with a white border, the image slightly warped from moisture. My first thought was that it must have been mixed in accidentally, maybe something from my sister's old camera. But when I looked closer, my stomach dropped. It was me, sleeping. I was curled on my side in bed, blanket pulled halfway over me, hair across my face. The shot had been taken from outside my balcony glass. I could see the faint reflection of rain in the corner of the image, like the night had been wet. My chest tightened as I turned the photo over. The back was blank, no writing, no date. But I knew when it was taken. The rain, the balcony, the man under the street lamp. It was that night. The thought settled in my bones like ice. He hadn't just been watching me from the street. He'd been inside before, close enough to take this. I sat there for a long time, the photo limp in my hands. I didn't call the police. What could I say? It had been months, and they hadn't found him the first time. Instead, I slipped the Polaroid into a Ziploc bag, tucked it deep in the back of my desk drawer, and tried to pretend it wasn't there. I got better at locking doors. Every lock, every time. I stopped leaving my balcony unlocked even for a minute. I started checking closets before bed, pulling the shower curtain open, glancing under the bed. Little routines that became second nature. But here's what no one tells you. Once you've felt that cold understanding that someone has been inside your space, inside your life, without permission, the locks are never enough. You sleep lighter, you listen harder, you learn to hear the difference between a building settling and a footstep, and you never, ever ignore that quiet, prickling instinct that says something's wrong. Because the truth is, it only takes a minute, and sometimes, that's all they need. We spend so much of our lives assuming danger announces itself. A loud crash, a scream, a shattering window. But the worst kinds of harm often arrive silently, slipping through the smallest cracks in our routines. Pay attention to those small instincts, the tiny alarms in your head. Trust them, because they might be the only warning you get. Some people say you get used to living alone. I don't think that's true. You just learn how to pretend you're comfortable with it. When I moved into the little ground floor apartment in Burlington, I told myself it was exactly what I needed. Simple, affordable, close to the diner where I worked. It sat on a quiet residential street lined with maples. Most of the neighbors were older, and at night, you could hear the wind off the lake. After years of roommates, dorm noise, and a relationship that ended with me packing my life into garbage bags, the stillness felt like control. My parents weren't speaking to me anymore. They'd wanted me to finish school, but I'd walked away halfway through my degree to work full-time. That decision split us clean down the middle, and by the time I realized how deep the cut was, there was no stitching it back together. The only thing that kept me sane was painting. I'd set up my easel in the living room right in front of the big bay window. During the day, the light poured in perfectly. At night, it worked the other way. Anyone on the street could see me framed in that warm square of glass. At first, I didn't care. Nobody in this neighborhood paid much attention anyway. I noticed him in late September. A man, maybe mid-40s, came into the diner during the slow lull between lunch and dinner. He sat in the far booth by the window, black coffee in front of him. Hours would pass. He never ordered food, never spoke except to ask for refills. His eyes, though, they followed me whenever I crossed the floor. I figured he was lonely, maybe a little odd but harmless. We get all types at the diner. But then came the notes. The first was folded and tucked under my windshield wiper after a shift. "You look so peaceful when you're painting." I stared at it for a long time in the parking lot, more puzzled than afraid. How did he know I painted? I shrugged it off. 2 weeks later. "The blue dress is my favorite on you." I didn't wear a blue dress to work. I hadn't worn one in months, except at home. By October, the notes had become a pattern. Always short, always personal, always unsigned. I told my coworker Jess one night as we rolled silverware. She frowned hard. "Claire, if he's noticing what you wear at home, that means he's watching you there." The way she said it made my skin tighten. Still, I didn't call the police. What would I say? A man might be watching me through my window. It felt flimsy, paranoid. Maybe I wanted to believe I was overreacting. November 21st was my one night off that week. I made tea, lit a couple of candles, and set up to paint. Music low, brushes lined up, the familiar smell of acrylics in the air. The world felt far away. Around 9, I passed the front window to grab more water for my tea and thought I saw movement outside. Just a shadow, quick and low, like a branch shifting in the wind. I told myself it was nothing. An hour later, I was bent over my canvas mixing a deep green when my phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number. "The green paint suits you." I froze, brush dripping on the floor. My phone's location was off. I hadn't posted anything about painting tonight. Slowly, I turned toward the window. The streetlight was dim, half blown out. But there, just beyond the glass, was the outline of a man. Still, watching. I backed away, heart pounding, and dialed 911. My voice shook as I whispered to the dispatcher, "Someone's outside my window, he's just standing there." She told me to lock myself in a room until officers arrived. I grabbed my phone, slipped into my bedroom, and turned the lock. I could hear my own breathing loud in the small space. Then from the living room came the faint click of my front door's latch. "Claire? Are you in there?" It wasn't the police. The voice was soft, calm, almost like he already knew I was inside. I didn't answer. I stayed pressed against the bedroom door, every nerve in my body screaming at me not to make a sound. My eyes darted to the window, but it was too small to fit through, and even if I could, the drop to the frozen ground outside would break something. The footsteps started then, slow, deliberate creaks across the hardwood floor. My lamp sat on the nightstand, heavy ceramic base, and I wrapped my fingers around it so tightly my knuckles ached. The steps stopped. I strained to hear breathing, anything, but the silence felt heavier than the air itself. Minutes passed, or maybe seconds. It was impossible to tell. Then came the sound of something brushing against the hallway wall. Fingertips, clothing. I bit down on my lip so hard I tasted blood. The voice again, closer this time. "You left your window open, Claire." It wasn't true. I hadn't touched the window all night. He was lying to get me to respond. I kept the phone line open, whispering into it. "He's inside. Please tell them to hurry. They're on their way," the dispatcher said. Her tone stayed steady, but I could hear the faint clicking of a keyboard, the low murmur of another voice on her end. "Stay with me. Do not open that door." A floorboard groaned just outside my bedroom. I tightened my grip on the lamp. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, my breath quick and shallow. And then, nothing. No retreat. No movement. Just stillness. When the first knock came, I almost dropped the lamp. It wasn't on my bedroom door. It came from the front of the apartment. Hard, fast pounding, followed by a man's voice calling, "Burlington Police, open up." I didn't move until the dispatcher confirmed it was them. "Open the door now." "That's the officers, Claire. You can—" I eased my bedroom door open, the lamp still clutched like a weapon. The living room was empty. The front door stood slightly ajar, letting in a thin blade of cold November air. Two officers stepped inside, scanning the apartment. One was tall and broad-shouldered, the other younger, eyes sharp as he moved through each room. "Stay here," the taller one told me. "We'll check the perimeter." I stood in the living room, the adrenaline leaving me shaky and lightheaded. I kept expecting to see him lurking in the corner, just out of sight, but the only sound was the low murmur of the officers as they cleared the space. After a few minutes, the younger officer called me over to the coffee table. "Was this here before?" On the table, sitting dead center, was a Polaroid photograph, the kind you have to shake after taking. The image showed me sleeping in my own bed, curled under the blankets. The angle was from the foot of the bed, my bedroom. I felt my stomach turn over. That wasn't here. The younger officer glanced at his partner, then back at me. "You keep a spare key anywhere? There's no sign of forced entry. No, I mean, maybe the landlord has one." "Could be," he said, though his voice made it sound like he didn't buy it. Nothing in the apartment was stolen. My wallet sat in plain view. My laptop, my phone, untouched. "This wasn't about theft," the taller officer said quietly. "They took the photo as evidence, advised me to stay with someone for the night, and left to canvass the area. I sat on the couch until the sun rose, every light on, the front door locked and chained. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I was moving out. I packed in a single day, clothes in trash bags, art supplies in boxes, dishes wrapped in whatever towels I could grab. I didn't care about organizing. I didn't care about breaking things. I just wanted out. Jess let me crash in her spare room while I searched for a new place. I didn't tell the landlord why I was leaving. I didn't even wait for my lease to end. I just paid the penalty and left the keys on the counter. For weeks, I jumped at every noise. A car door slamming outside, footsteps in the hallway. Even Jess knocking on my door made my pulse spike. My sleep was a mess, shallow, broken, and full of dreams where I'd wake up to find someone sitting in the corner of my room. Eventually, I found a second-floor apartment across town. No bay windows, no easy view from the street. I bought thicker curtains and kept them drawn tight. It wasn't the light I missed. It was the illusion that the world wasn't watching me. Months passed. I started to feel normal again, or at least something close to it. I worked, I painted, I took the long way home if I thought someone might be following me. The fear dulled into a background hum. Then, in early March, I came home to find a package on my doormat. No return address. Just my name in neat, unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was my missing blue dress, the one I hadn't seen since last summer. It was folded perfectly, like it had been pressed, and when I touched it, it was warm. Not like it had been in the sun, warm like someone had just taken it off. I stood there for a long time, the dress in my hands, before finally stuffing it into a garbage bag and walking it straight to the dumpster behind the building. I didn't even want it in the apartment for another second. That night, I barely slept. Every creak in the walls, every gust of wind against the window, my mind filled in with his presence. I knew I might never see him again. I also knew I might never stop looking for him in every crowd. The police never found him. Without fingerprints, witnesses, or clear camera footage, the case went nowhere. In the report, it was just listed as suspicious circumstances, unknown suspect. But for me, it's never been unknown. I know exactly who it was. I just don't know when he'll come back. Danger isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it's quiet, patient, and watching long before it acts. Trust your instincts, even when you feel silly, even when you think you're overreacting. Fear might just be your body's way of warning you before it's too late. Seattle has its own kind of loneliness. The rain doesn't fall hard, it lingers, clings to your coat, seeps into your shoes. The streets shine under neon signs, but you can walk 3 blocks without making eye contact with a single person. When I moved into the Rainier View residences, I thought the city would feel smaller from the 18th floor, that being high above it would make me feel in control. I was wrong. The loft had floor-to-ceiling glass walls on 2 sides, giving me a panoramic sweep of downtown and the sound in the distance. At night, the whole city glowed beneath me like a living circuit board. It should have been beautiful, and sometimes it was, but it also made me feel exposed, like I was in a display case. Ethan, my boyfriend of 3 years, had just taken a 6-month research job overseas. We talked every day, but the absence in the apartment was a physical thing. A shadow in the corners, a cold spot in the bed. I threw myself into work to fill the space. As a financial analyst for a consulting firm, I had enough spreadsheets and market reports to keep me chained to my desk 14 hours a day. The Sunderson Energy account was killing me. Their numbers were a mess, and my job was to untangle them before the board meeting in December. I barely left the apartment except to grab takeout from the Thai place downstairs. My sleep schedule disintegrated. 2 or 3 hours at dawn, maybe a nap in the afternoon. It was on one of those late nights, maybe 3:30 a.m., that I first noticed it. I stood from my chair to stretch, rubbing the ache in my neck, and my eyes caught my reflection in the glass. Only, it didn't quite match me. My arm went up, but in the glass it rose a fraction of a second later. It was so subtle I thought I'd imagined it. I even laughed at myself. "You're losing it, Kayla," I muttered, turning back to my desk. Coffee and exhaustion. That's all it was. 2 nights later, on a video call with my manager, I caught the same lag out of the corner of my eye. My reflection's lips were moving slightly slower than mine. My words were out of sync with the mouth in the glass. Kayla, you still there? My manager's voice snapped me back. I mumbled something about a bad internet connection and ended the call. That was when I started testing it. Standing in front of the glass, I'd wave or nod, and most of the time it matched perfectly. But not always. Sometimes there was a delay. Sometimes the reflection's eyes lingered on me after I'd already turned away. I told myself I was just exhausted, that my brain was glitching like a bad live stream. But there was a thread of unease winding tighter every day. 3 days later, after working straight through the weekend, I was reheating leftovers when it happened again. Only this time there was no question. I crossed the living room toward the kitchen, bowl in hand, and glanced at the glass wall. My reflection was still sitting at my desk, not moving. Just there. The bowl clattered onto the counter. My first thought was that I was hallucinating. My second thought was that hallucinations don't hold their shape for more than a blink, and this thing wasn't fading. I stepped closer to the glass, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The city stretched out beyond me, 1,000 tiny lights against the black sky, but I didn't see any of it. All I saw was the me that wasn't me, head bent slightly like it was listening for something. "This isn't real," I whispered. "You're just tired. Go to bed." But I didn't. I sat in the dark, laptop closed, phone in hand, and waited. At 2:17 a.m., the reflection stood. I didn't move, but it did. Slowly, deliberately. It stepped toward the glass like it was on the other side, approaching me from somewhere I couldn't reach. I fumbled with my phone, pulling up the security camera app. The feed from the living room showed nothing but an empty view of the city. No movement, no figure, but when I looked up from the screen, it was still there, closer now. I called Ethan, whispering into the phone. "It's here. It's watching me." He told me to leave. Go to my sister's, now. I didn't want to turn my back on it, but eventually I backed toward the door, coat in hand. The last thing I saw before leaving was the reflection tilting its head and smiling in a way I've never smiled in my life. The hallway outside my apartment was bright and empty, but I still moved quickly, my shoes silent on the carpet. My pulse only eased when the elevator doors shut between me and the loft. Even then, I kept glancing at the mirrored steel walls, half expecting to see something in my reflection that wasn't supposed to be there. I spent the rest of the night at a 24-hour coffee shop a few blocks away. It was noisy, full of clinking mugs and soft jazz from overhead speakers. It should have been comforting, but my mind kept replaying the moment when the other me stood up. It wasn't just movement, it was intent. At 6 a.m., I called in sick and texted Ethan to let him know I'd stay somewhere else. But by mid-morning, I felt ridiculous. I hadn't slept, and exhaustion has a way of turning shadows into monsters. So, against Ethan's protests, I went back. The loft looked exactly as I'd left it. My desk was neat, the couch unruffled, the glass wall a flawless sheet of morning gray. The city outside was wrapped in fog. I tried to shake it off. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat at my desk, determined to prove there was nothing wrong. I worked until the sunset turned the glass into a black mirror again. For an hour, nothing happened. And then as I typed, I saw it in the corner of my eye. The reflection's head was tilted toward me, just slightly, as if it were listening again. I froze. My hands hovered over the keyboard. I turned my head to face it, and this time, it didn't move. It just stayed angled, staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. The air in the apartment felt heavier, like all the oxygen had been pulled out. My scalp prickled. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. My phone buzzed on the desk, snapping me out of it. A message from Ethan. "Please, Kayla, leave tonight. Something's wrong." That was enough. I grabbed my coat and left without looking back. The next morning, I went straight to the building's security office. The night guard, Marcus, was a stocky man in his 50s with a voice like gravel. I told him I'd seen something strange in my apartment, and I wanted to review the security footage. He didn't ask many questions. "You got cameras inside?" "One in the living room," I said. "All right, let's see what we got." We pulled up the feed from the night before. For nearly an hour, it was just me at the desk, typing. The reflection in the glass wall looked normal from the camera's perspective. No lag, no movement. Then around 9:40 p.m., Marcus paused the video. "You see that?" It was a single frame, almost easy to miss. My body was turned toward the desk, but the reflection was turned toward the camera. My stomach dropped. We scrolled forward frame by frame. In one, the reflection's mouth was curled into the faintest smile. In another, its eyes looked sharper, more focused than mine. And then it was gone, perfectly matching me again. "That's not possible," Marcus said, leaning back. "I told you," I whispered. He studied the footage for a long moment before saying, "You want my advice? Move. Tonight." By noon, I'd packed a suitcase and booked a hotel room. I told myself I'd come back for the rest when I could. But deep down, I knew I wasn't coming back at all. 2 weeks passed before I returned. The hotel was eating up my savings, and I needed to get my furniture, my clothes, my paintings, everything I'd left behind in that loft. I waited until mid-morning on a bright, windy Tuesday, hoping daylight would make the place feel less threatening. Marcus met me in the lobby. He offered to come up with me, and I didn't refuse. The apartment looked exactly as I remembered it. Dust on the desk, the faint smell of old coffee, the wide sheet of glass framing the skyline. It was hard to believe how much it had terrified me. Marcus stayed by the door while I started boxing up kitchen items. Every so often my eyes flicked toward the glass wall. It just reflected the city, the light, and me. Nothing more. I was sealing the last box when Marcus said, "Hold on, you moved this, right?" He was pointing to my office chair. I frowned. "No. Why?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped over and crouched down. There, faint in the plush carpet, was the outline of footprints. Bare feet. They started at the chair and stopped just short of the glass wall. I felt the skin on my arms tighten. "Marcus?" "Yeah," he said, his voice low. "You should go now." I didn't argue. I left with what I could carry, abandoning the rest. I didn't even ask for my security deposit back. 2 months later, I got an email from the building's management. They were offering former tenants first pick on newly renovated units. Out of morbid curiosity, I clicked through the photos. The loft looked brighter, modernized, cleaner, but in one of the wide shots of the living room, I saw something. In the reflection of the glass wall, just faint enough to question, was a figure standing behind the photographer. The head was tilted, and it was smiling. Not everything we see, or think we see, can be explained away by logic or exhaustion. Sometimes the wrong place can hold the wrong presence, and ignoring that instinct can be dangerous. When your mind screams that something is off, listen. Leaving might be the safest choice you'll ever make. If you've ever lived in an old New England house in winter, you know the sound it makes when the cold sinks into its bones. The walls creak, the pipes groan, and the wind slips through the cracks no matter how well you seal them. I'd been renting my 2-story place in Portsmouth for just under a year, and I thought I'd learned all its noises. The house wasn't big. 2 bedrooms upstairs, 1 bathroom, a narrow hallway that caught the cold like a trap. My room faced the street, with an old maple tree outside that scraped its branches against the glass on windy nights. The other bedroom, the spare room, faced the backyard. I never used it. When I first moved in, I thought about turning it into an art space. The landlord had left it furnished with a queen bed, a wooden dresser, and a small nightstand with a single drawer. There was even a thick beige rug over the warped hardwood floor. But something about it felt staged, like it was set up for someone else, not me. I ended up closing the door after the first week and letting it collect dust. That Saturday in March, I had no real plans. Claire had canceled our brunch, the sidewalks were still half covered in ice, and I'd decided to hibernate. Laundry, a true crime podcast, and maybe some binge-watching before bed. That was my day. Around 2 in the afternoon, I was in the kitchen pouring another cup of coffee when I heard it, a dull thud from upstairs. It wasn't loud enough to be alarming, but it was enough to stop me mid-pour. I stood there for a second, listening. The radiator hummed, the fridge clicked on, and the silence upstairs stretched out. Probably the heat pipes, I said out loud, though I'd never heard them sound like that before. I let it go. By evening it was forgotten. The sun went down early as it does in March, and I made pasta while watching the street outside turn to shadow. Around 9:40 p.m., I was curled up on the couch with popcorn when the second thud came. Louder this time, heavier. I set the bowl down, climbed halfway up the stairs, and called out, "Hello?" Nothing. I waited a beat longer, trying to hear if anything moved, just the low hum of the radiator. My shoulders loosened, but I still found myself double-checking the locks before I sat down again. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being unsettled. In the kitchen, I noticed the salt shaker was on the opposite counter from where I'd left it earlier. The dish towel had fallen to the floor. Little things. Not enough to call anyone, but enough to make me feel watched. By the time I brushed my teeth, I'd convinced myself I was being paranoid. That was before midnight. I'd just drifted into that hazy space between waking and sleep when I heard it, the click of a door latch turning. I knew the sound instantly. I sat up, heart thudding, straining to hear. It came from the hallway. No, not the hallway. The spare room. I padded to my bedroom door and eased it open, my bare feet silent on the cold floor. The spare room's door was in my line of sight. Normally it was slightly ajar. I never bothered to shut it completely. Now it was shut. Not just shut, it was flush with the frame. I told myself it could have been a draft or the house settling, but drafts don't turn doorknobs. I stepped closer, every inch of me alert. My fingers brushed the cold brass knob. It didn't turn. Locked from the inside. And then I heard it. Soft. Subtle. Fabric shifting against fabric. I backed up so fast I nearly tripped. Nope. 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 The fear hit me all at once. The kind of fear that wipes every rational thought from your head. I bolted down the stairs, grabbed my coat, and ran outside barefoot into the freezing night air. From the sidewalk, I dialed 911. My voice was shaking so badly I had to repeat the address twice before the dispatcher got it right. The police arrived within minutes. They entered in pairs, weapons drawn, moving room to room. I stood outside, hugging myself against the cold. 10 minutes later, an officer called me inside. "You're gonna want to see this." In the spare room, the bed was unmade. Grocery bags were stuffed under it. Instant noodles, bottled water, protein bars. A blanket I didn't own lay crumpled near the dresser. The officer looked at me with that calm, professional face cops get when they don't want to scare you. "Someone's been staying here," he said. "Probably slipped out when they heard us." I didn't sleep at home that night. I stayed at Claire's. But even as I lay on her couch, warm under a borrowed blanket, one thought wouldn't leave me. How long had they been here before I noticed? The next morning I went back with Claire. I didn't want to face the place alone. We pulled up just after sunrise, the pale March light making the house look smaller than I remembered. Inside, the air was still. Too still. It didn't smell like my home anymore. It smelled faintly of someone else's laundry detergent, a scent I couldn't place. The police had cleared everything the night before. The grocery bags were gone, the bed was made again. But there was something unsettling about the way the room looked now. Too neat. As if the mess had been erased, but not the memory of it. Claire walked over to the window, peering out into the frost-covered backyard. "Been coming in and out while you were at work," she said quietly. "They must have..." I shook my head. "No, I work from home most days." That made her turn to look at me. I could see the thought forming in her face before she spoke. Then they were here while you were here. The words made my skin crawl. I thought about the little things I'd been brushing off for months. A coffee mug not where I left it, a blanket on the couch slightly rumpled, the bathroom mirror fogged when I hadn't showered yet. We didn't stay long. Claire grabbed a box from the living room and started helping me pack a few essentials. I was stuffing clothes into a duffel bag when she stopped in the hallway. "Hey," she called. "Was this like this before?" She was pointing upward. The attic hatch, a small square cut into the ceiling with a pull string, was hanging open by an inch. Dust was scattered on the floor beneath it, and faint shoe prints marked the wood. I didn't remember the hatch ever being open. Claire backed away from it. "I'm not touching that." Neither was I. We left the rest of my things behind. That night, I couldn't stop replaying the last few weeks in my head. Every odd sound, every misplaced object, every moment I'd shrugged off because I didn't want to seem paranoid. The attic explained it all. The police thought the person had been using the spare room as a base, but that hatch meant they could have been anywhere in the house without me knowing. They could have been standing in the hallway while I was asleep, listening, watching. I went through my phone photos from the last few months, looking for clues. In one shot of my living room, taken during a Zoom call in January, the spare room door was visible in the background. I zoomed in, half expecting to see something, and there it was, just barely. A sliver of a shadow at the edge of the doorway. It could have been anything. But the longer I stared, the more certain I became it was a person. The police never found the intruder. No fingerprints, no footprints outside in the snow. The attic was empty when they checked it, and the back door locks showed no sign of tampering. Whoever they were, they had a way in and out that nobody figured out. I broke the lease the next morning, packed what I could fit in my car, and left the key on the counter. I didn't even look back at the house as I drove away. I thought leaving the house would put distance between me and the unease, but it followed me. Even at Claire's place, I found myself checking her spare room 3-4 times a night. I'd stand in the doorway, staring into the shadows until my eyes adjusted, half expecting to see someone curled up in the corner. The thing about not knowing who it was, or how long they'd been there, is that your mind fills in the blanks. Every creak in the floorboards becomes a footstep. Every faint draft becomes someone moving behind you. 2 weeks after I moved out, I got an email from the property management company. They wanted to know if I'd left anything behind before they started showing the house again. I ignored it, but that night, curiosity got the better of me. I clicked the online listing. The photos were bright, cheerful, a staged couch with colorful throw pillows, sunlight spilling across the hardwood floors. But in the picture of the upstairs hallway, something made my skin tighten. The attic hatch was closed, yes, but there was a faint smear of dust trailing from it toward the spare room door, like something had been dragged across the ceiling. I shut my laptop. I didn't sleep that night. Weeks later, Claire sent me a news link. The headline read, "Portsmouth police investigating break-ins. Residents report missing food, moved objects." The article mentioned my old street. They still hadn't caught anyone. Even now in my new apartment, I keep a chair wedged under my bedroom door at night. I never use the spare room. I don't even open the door. Some habits, once you learn them, don't leave. We like to think we'd notice if someone crossed the line into our space, but real danger often hides in the ordinary. Listen to the unease. Trust the small alarms in your head. The moment you start explaining them away is the moment someone can make themselves at home where they don't belong. In the summer of 1994, I was 9 years old and suddenly without a place to call home. My parents weren't divorcing quietly. They were dismantling their marriage with the kind of shouting that cracked through walls and bled into my dreams. My mother's sister suggested sending me to Grandma's place in Las Cruces for the summer. "It'll be good for her," she told my mom. "Some peace and quiet, and she'll get to be outside instead of cooped up in that mess." Peace and quiet sounded strange to me, like a thing people made up in movies. But Grandma's house was exactly that, a squat, sun-baked single-story with faded green shutters and a porch swing that sighed with every sway. The place smelled like sagebrush and sun-warmed wood, and at night the air was thick with the hum of cicadas. Grandma was not the rocking chair, cookie-baking type. She was wiry, sharp-eyed, and carried herself like a person who'd lived too far from the city to expect help to come quickly. She'd been widowed for years and knew every person on her street by name, and every person's business too. Her one hard rule for me came on my first night, when I tried to wander past the gate to chase a lizard along the dirt road. She called me back sharp. "You don't go past that gate after dark," she said, her voice low and steady. "Why?" I asked. She didn't even glance up from her crocheting. "Because people out there don't always want to be seen." That first week passed slow. Mornings meant cereal and cartoons. Afternoons were for drawing or reading, and evenings, I'd sit on the porch swing while she crocheted inside. I'd rock back and forth, toes brushing the dusty boards, and watch the sunset bleed into the horizon. Sometimes I'd hear the faint yip of a coyote or the rumble of a truck heading toward the highway. But mostly it was just stillness. It wasn't until the second Saturday night that something broke that stillness. Grandma had gone to bed early, complaining of a headache. I stayed outside longer than usual, the Coke in my hand sweating against my palm, the porch swing creaking in rhythm. The streetlight near the end of the road flickered weakly, throwing half shadows onto the gravel. That's when I heard it. The sound of footsteps on loose stone. Not hurried, not clumsy, just steady. Crunch, crunch, crunch. I leaned forward, peering toward the gate. My first thought was it might be one of the neighborhood kids coming back from somewhere, but the air felt wrong. "Hello?" I called, my voice cracking in the still night. No answer. A warm wind pushed the smell of creosote across the porch, and I felt a chill crawl up my arms despite the heat. That's when I saw them. Two shapes at the far end of the dirt road, one taller, one shorter, both perfectly still. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe they were just neighbors talking. Maybe they were lost, but they weren't talking, and they weren't moving. I slid off the swing and stepped inside, letting the screen door close behind me with a soft click. The living room light cast a reflection on the glass, making it hard to see outside, but I couldn't resist checking again. I pressed my face close to the window. They were closer now, just beyond the gate. The taller one's head was tilted like he was studying the house. The smaller figure, a woman, I guessed, stood with her arms hanging stiffly at her sides, unmoving. I couldn't see their faces clearly, just shadows with edges. But I knew, with the kind of certainty that made my stomach knot, that they were looking right at me. I thought about waking Grandma, but she'd been tired all week, her headaches coming more often. I hesitated, then decided against it. I didn't want to sound like some scared little kid over nothing. Instead, I went to the fireplace, my heart pounding, and grabbed the poker. It felt heavy in my hands, the metal cold even in the summer heat. I stood near the front door listening. Then came the knock. Not on the door, on the window. I froze. My reflection in the glass looked pale, wide-eyed. And then, in the corner of the pane, the man's face appeared, dimly lit, just enough for me to see the faint curve of a smile. Instinct overrode thought. I swung the poker hard, the crack of shattering glass exploding into the quiet night. The figures jerked back, and then they were running, their shapes slipping into the darkness beyond the streetlight. I stood there, breathing hard, the poker still in my grip, shards of glass glittering at my feet. That's when I finally called for Grandma. Grandma came out of her room fast for someone her age, robe tied crooked, eyes sharp the moment she saw the broken glass. "What happened?" she asked, her voice quick but steady. "There were people," I stammered. "At the window. They were watching." She didn't ask if I was sure. She didn't tell me I'd imagined it. She just crossed the room to the phone mounted on the wall and started dialing. "Sam," she said when someone picked up. "Get over here, bring a light." Within minutes, my Uncle Sam was jogging up the driveway with two of the neighbors behind him. One carried a heavy mag light, the other a wooden baseball bat. I clutched the poker like my life depended on it while Grandma filled them in. They didn't waste time. Sam headed straight for the gate, sweeping his flashlight across the dirt road. The beam caught two distinct sets of footprints, one larger, one smaller, pressed into the loose gravel. They followed the trail past the edge of the streetlight's reach, into the darker stretch where the road thinned out toward the desert. And then the track stopped. Just gone. Could have stepped off into the brush, one neighbor muttered, scanning the shadows, hiding. Or their Sam kept the beam moving over the mesquite and dry weeds, but nothing moved. The night swallowed every sound except the faint hum of insects. When they came back, Grandma locked the gate with a padlock I didn't even know she had, then locked the screen door and the main door. She set the shotgun on the table beside her chair, a quiet warning to whatever, or whoever, was out there. That night, she made up a bed for me in her room. We didn't talk much. I think she knew that anything she said, "It's fine," or "You're safe now," would have rung hollow. I fell asleep listening to the occasional creak of the house, wondering if those people were still out there in the dark. Morning came harsh and bright. I followed Grandma to the porch, squinting into the sun. The shattered window still gaped, glass shards scattered on the porch boards. Outside the gate, the footprints were clear in the daylight, leading up to the spot where they'd vanished. Grandma didn't linger. "Eat your breakfast," she said, heading inside to call the police. 2 officers came by before noon. One was young and polite, the other older, with a weathered face that didn't seem surprised by much. They took my statement while Grandma stood with her arms crossed, glaring toward the road. When I described the man's smile, the younger cop glanced at the older one. "We've had a few reports of a pair like that. Tall male, shorter female. They hang around houses watching. Might be checking for empty places. Burglars?" Grandma asked. "Most likely," the older one said, though his tone carried a hint of something else. After they left, Grandma went quiet. She spent the rest of the day in the kitchen, cleaning and cooking, but I noticed how often she glanced toward the window, even though it was now covered with plywood. That evening she surprised me by sitting with me on the porch swing, something she hadn't done before. The shotgun rested against the wall beside her. We didn't say much. The cicadas buzzed, the sun dipped low, and the shadows stretched across the dirt road. For the first time, I realized she wasn't just keeping me company. She was watching the dark. The next morning, the kitchen smelled of strong coffee and warm tortillas. Grandma already had the Las Cruces Sun News folded open on the table. She tapped the small headline with one finger. "Police warn residents after pair of suspected burglars spotted near homes." The description made my stomach tighten. Tall man, smaller woman, seen late at night near houses on the outskirts of town. No arrests had been made. The police were urging caution. Grandma slid the paper toward me, her face unreadable. "That's them," I whispered. She didn't answer, just sipped her coffee, but her free hand found mine and squeezed. Life didn't go back to normal after that. For the rest of the summer, we locked up before sunset. If we sat on the porch at night, it was never alone. Sometimes Grandma would hum an old hymn while the swing creaked back and forth. I don't know if it was for comfort or to let anyone listening know that we were awake, alert, and not afraid. When August came, my parents drove out from California to pick me up. I didn't tell them much about that night, just that we'd had strangers near the house. But when I hugged Grandma goodbye, I felt the weight of what had happened settle deep inside me. It wasn't about the broken window or even the strangers. It was about knowing that safety could be thin as glass and just as easy to shatter. On the drive back west, I kept thinking about the desert road beyond the gate. In daylight, it looked harmless. At night, it was something else entirely. I realized then why Grandma had given me that rule. It wasn't superstition. It was survival. Years later, I'd still remember her sitting beside me in the dark, her shoulders squared, her eyes on the road, the shotgun at her side. She'd never called herself brave, but bravery doesn't always look like charging into danger. Sometimes it's just holding your ground when the shadows press in. Trust the instincts of those who've walked the road before you. Rules made from experience aren't there to limit you. They're there to protect you from dangers you can't yet see. I'd never been the kind of person to get uneasy in my own home. Daniel used to joke that I could fall asleep anywhere, in the middle of a thunderstorm, during a neighbor's late-night barbecue, even once at an airport gate with people bustling all around me. But that September, when he packed his carry-on and kissed me goodbye before heading to Denver, the house felt different. We'd lived in that small Madison bungalow for almost 8 years. One story, cedar siding, a tiny porch with 2 chairs that had never quite matched. The neighborhood was quiet in a way that made you notice small things: the thump of the mail in the box, the occasional squeak of a bike chain from kids riding past, the sound of our back neighbor's shovel cutting into dirt. That neighbor was Mr. Harland, retired, gray-haired, with the look of someone who'd been strong once and hadn't quite realized he wasn't anymore. He wasn't unfriendly, but he wasn't warm either. Our conversations were mostly limited to waves over the fence and the occasional exchange about the weather. I knew he did odd yard work at odd hours, but in a sleepy street like ours, quirks were part of the charm. The first night Daniel was gone, I barely noticed anything unusual. I painted for a while in my studio, an unfinished still life I'd been putting off, and then made myself tea. The second night, though, I caught movement in the backyard while rinsing my cup. It wasn't the slow sway of branches or the jittery dart of a rabbit. It was Harland, under the pale kitchen light, standing in the middle of his lawn with a shovel. The grass around him was cut into a perfect rectangle. I thought maybe he was transplanting something, but then I saw the hole. It was deep, and it wasn't near any of his flower beds. I opened the back door and stepped into the cool air. Might if I'd run into him at the grocery store. "Evening, Mr. Harland," I called, He looked up, resting the shovel handle under his palms. His eyes were shadowed, unreadable. "Just getting rid of what needs to be gone," he said, his voice flat. I laughed awkwardly. "Big project?" No answer. He went back to digging. I went back inside, locking the door without thinking. But the next morning, when I saw him out there again, waist deep in the same hole, the uneasy feeling hadn't gone away. By the following night, that uneasy feeling had hardened into something sharper. It was 2:14 a.m. when I woke up, not from a noise, but from a strange orange flicker coming through the blinds. My first thought was fire. I pulled the cord to peek outside and froze. Harland was still out there. The hole was finished now, a dark gash in the lawn, and he was hammering a wooden cross into the ground above it. The glow came from a single lantern balanced on the grass beside him. He was talking quietly to himself, his words lost in the night air. The next day I called Daniel. "It's probably nothing," I told him, pacing from the kitchen to the living room and back. "But he's digging, like deep holes, and last night he put a cross in one. I don't know. It feels wrong." He sighed into the phone. "Call the non-emergency number. If it's nothing, no harm done." An officer came by that afternoon, a stocky man with a buzz cut and tired eyes. He crossed into Harland's yard, spoke with him for maybe 2 minutes, and came back shaking his head. He says it's a memorial for his dog. Seems harmless. Old man like that, probably just holding on to memories. I tried to accept it, but something about the way Harland had looked at me over the shovel still stuck in my mind. The next morning, I was painting when I heard it, the scrape of metal against soil. I went to the studio window and felt my stomach drop. He was digging a second hole. By Thursday, the rhythm of my day had shifted to match his. I found myself glancing toward the backyard every half hour, like I was keeping tabs on a storm that hadn't decided yet whether to break. The second hole was bigger than the first, wide enough that he had to climb in and out using the shovel for leverage. Around dusk, I stepped out onto the porch with my coffee, hoping fresh air might clear my head. From this angle, I could see the neat piles of earth he'd made. The hole was so deep now I could only see the top of his head when he bent down. He worked without gloves, his nails blackened from dirt. I thought about walking over, starting some harmless small talk, but something in my gut stopped me. Instead, I lingered on the porch until he finally went inside. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Every creak in the house felt magnified. Every shadow along the ceiling seemed to stretch too far. Somewhere around midnight, I heard it. Not the scrape of a shovel this time, but a faint metallic clink. The sound came in intervals, like chains being shifted or dragged. I sat up, heart thudding, straining to hear. It stopped. Then, after a few minutes, it came again. I reached for my phone, thumb hovering over Daniel's contact, but I didn't want to wake him in Denver over what might still be nothing. Instead, I stayed curled under the covers, listening until exhaustion finally pulled me under. The next morning, I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. I carried my coffee to the kitchen, ready to peek through the blinds, and froze. Near the shed that sat against his fence, there was a large black trash bag. It was tied tightly. The plastic stretched around something inside. The shape was wrong. Not round like yard waste. Long. Rigid. From my angle, I could have sworn it looked like an arm. By noon, I was pacing the living room with my phone pressed to my ear. This time, I didn't call Daniel first. "Non-emergency police, what's the address?" the dispatcher asked. I told her, my voice tight. "I know how this sounds, but there's a bag in my neighbor's yard. It doesn't look like garbage, and he's been digging holes. Big ones." They sent a different officer this time. He stayed in Harlan's yard for longer, and maybe 10 minutes, before coming back. His face was polite, but there was an edge to his voice when he said, "We're aware of the situation. We're in the process of getting a search warrant. For now, stay in your house and keep your doors locked." Those last words didn't feel like standard advice. That night, the air was heavy with a September humidity that clung to everything. I sat in my studio, lights off, watching his yard through a narrow slit in the blinds. At some point, I must have dozed off in the chair because the next thing I knew, I was waking to the sound of a car pulling into his driveway. A woman got out. Mid-30s, tall, her expression tight in a way I recognized. The look of someone bracing for bad news. She knocked on his door, waited, then let herself in. The lights came on in the house. 15 minutes later, she stepped back outside with Harlan beside her. His movements were slower now, his shoulders sagging. She said something I couldn't hear, and he nodded. They got into her car and drove away. I didn't sleep that night either. The yard was silent, but I kept seeing that trash bag in my mind, sitting beside the shed in the dark. By the next afternoon, the yard looked different. Not cleaner exactly, but less alive. A crew of men in jeans and work gloves arrived in a battered pickup. They didn't talk much, just nodded at me when they saw me watching from the porch. One by one, they filled in the holes Harlan had dug, tamping the earth flat with the backs of their shovels. The wooden cross was pulled up and tossed into the truck bed. The trash bags, 3 of them now, were loaded in with the same quiet efficiency. No police cars, no flashing lights, no curious neighbors peering over fences. It was like someone had decided this was a problem best erased rather than explained. 2 days later, a for sale sign appeared in the yard. I didn't see Harlan again. When I finally got the courage to call the woman who'd picked him up and his daughter, she surprised me by answering. Her voice was warm but tired, as if she'd repeated this explanation too many times already. "My dad's been unwell for a while," she said. "It's dementia. He gets fixated on things, digging, burying, moving stuff around. Sometimes he tells me he's hiding valuables. Sometimes he says he's getting rid of bad memories. None of it makes sense, but it's never been violent." I wanted to ask about the bags, about the metallic clinking, about why the police had seemed so careful, but her voice softened and she said, "Please don't think badly of him. He was a good man. Still is, most of the time. After I hung up, I stood at the kitchen window, staring at the patch of dirt where the first hole had been. Maybe the bags had been nothing more than old junk. Maybe the clinking was just tools shifting in the shed. Maybe the only real danger was my imagination, stoked by a week alone in a quiet house. But sometimes, late at night, I still picture him in the yard under the moonlight, not confused, not lost, but deliberate, working with the patience of someone who knew exactly what he was burying and why. We often think danger only comes from strangers, but the truth is, we never fully know what's happening behind the fences and closed doors around us. It's better to trust your instincts even if they turn out to be wrong, because one day they might be the only thing standing between you and harm. Some Sundays feel like they've been pulled straight from a photograph, all muted light and soft air, a stillness you can almost hear. That's how it was on October 3rd, 2004, in Ridgefield, Connecticut. The kind of chilly autumn day where you can smell wood smoke long before you see it curling from the chimneys. Our house was small and square, a Cape Cod style with faded blue siding, and a porch that creaked when you stepped on the second board from the left. Inside, the rooms always felt a little dim in the fall, like the light came in reluctantly. My parents had a rhythm to Sundays that felt set in stone. Dad worked his weekend mechanic shifts down at Halpern's Auto, Mom volunteered at the animal shelter, and Matt, my older brother, was now 2 months into his freshman year of college. The house had never been truly loud, but without Matt, it had a different kind of quiet, heavier, like it was missing a heartbeat. I had my own way of filling the space. My bedroom upstairs was part workspace, part teenage mess, with rolls of film and photo prints scattered across the desk. My Nikon wasn't fancy, a second-hand FM10 with a slight dent on the side, but I loved it the way some kids loved their guitars. Photography made me feel like I could freeze the parts of life that mattered and ignore the ones that didn't. That morning, Mom had paused in the doorway before leaving, keys in hand. "Lock up after me," she said, "and don't wander outside. You heard about those weird break-ins?" I had. The Ridgefield Press had run a short piece about someone knocking on doors late at night, taking packages, sometimes moving things around on porches like they wanted you to notice. Most people assumed it was bored teenagers, a dare gone too far. I locked the front door after her and climbed upstairs to work on a few prints. The house groaned in that familiar way old houses do, settling into the afternoon. I was adjusting the contrast on a black and white photo when I heard it, a sharp, deliberate knock at the back door. Nobody ever used the back door except for us. My stomach tightened as I went downstairs, moving slowly enough that each step felt longer than the last. I peeked through the kitchen window. The deck was empty. The yard beyond it, with its patchy grass and maple trees, was still. I told myself it could have been a branch or a neighbor's kid cutting through the yard. But my hands felt a little too cold when I went back upstairs. I was trying to lose myself in my work again when the phone rang. "Hello?" There was a pause, then a man's voice, low, calm, almost conversational. "The light in your upstairs hallway just flickered. Did you see it?" I turned my head toward the landing. The bulb above the stairs swayed ever so slightly, casting shadows that shifted on the wall. "I think you have the wrong number," I said quickly, and hung up. I stood there for a while, my eyes fixed on the bulb, until the house seemed to settle again. But the air had changed. It wasn't the quiet of a Sunday afternoon anymore. It was the kind of quiet that waits for you to notice it. The second call came less than half an hour later. This time, there was no voice, just slow, steady breathing. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice sharper than I expected. Click. I set the receiver down and listened. No footsteps, no creak of the porch. Just the low hum of the refrigerator. I told myself to stop overreacting, to focus on the photo I'd been editing. But my eyes kept wandering toward the hall outside my bedroom, the bulb over the stairs, the shadow it cast on the wall. By 4:15, the unease had built into something I couldn't ignore. I called Dad at work. "Someone's messing with me," I said. They called twice. They knew the light was flickering. "Kiddo, I'm buried in brake jobs. Probably just some prankster. Keep the doors locked and stay put. I'll be home in a couple hours." I hung up and headed to the kitchen to make tea. That's when I saw it. The back door was unlocked. I knew I had locked it. My hand trembled as I slid the bolt home. That's when I noticed the footprints, muddy, distinct, trailing from the door to the far corner of the kitchen and stopping. No exit path, no second trail, just gone. The hair on my neck prickled. I grabbed the phone and dialed 911. My voice shook as I told the dispatcher what I'd seen. She told me to stay on the line. Officers were 2 minutes away. I'd just stepped into the hallway when I heard the floorboard creak upstairs. It was slow, deliberate, like someone shifting their weight. My grip tightened on the camera still hanging around my neck. And then I saw him. At the top of the stairs, standing just far enough in the shadows that I couldn't make out his face. His eyes caught the light, small, reflective points in the dark. He didn't run. He didn't move. He just watched me. The front door crashed open as the officers came in. I blinked, and the man was gone. The only thing left was a Polaroid on the top step. It was a picture of me, taken through my bedroom window earlier that day. The first thing the officers did was sweep the upstairs. I stayed in the kitchen, clutching the edge of the counter, trying to hear over the thud of their boots and the creak of each floorboard they stepped on. Every sound felt louder than it should. One of them, Officer Kramer, according to the tag on his jacket, came down a few minutes later. He held up the Polaroid in a gloved hand. "Where did you say you found this?" "Top of the stairs," I said. My voice cracked a little. It wasn't there earlier. The other officer, Delaney, was still upstairs. I could hear him opening closet doors, moving things. When he came down, he shook his head. "No one's here now, but the attic hatch is loose, could have been hiding up there." The thought made my skin crawl. That attic was barely more than a crawl space, but I'd never liked going up there, even in daylight. "Do you lock your windows?" Kramer asked. "Most of them," I said. "The upstairs bathroom one sticks, so I usually leave it." He exchanged a look with Delaney. "That's probably how he got in. We'll dust for prints, but rain's coming tonight, so footprints outside might be a loss." They stayed another half hour, checking the yard and shining flashlights into the tree line. I stood by the back door, staring at the muddy prints in my kitchen, until they were just shapes, no longer footprints. Before they left, Kramer told me, "Keep your phone with you. If anything, and I mean anything, feels off, call us." We've had 2 other reports like this in the last month. After they were gone, the house felt wrong. Too empty in some corners, too crowded in others. I locked every window, double-checked the back door, and carried my camera into my room like it was something more than a camera, like it might keep me safe. It was almost 9 p.m. when Dad got home. The police had called him on the way to the station, so he knew the broad strokes. But seeing his face change when I showed him the Polaroid, that's what stuck with me. He didn't look scared. He looked furious. "I'm getting a new deadbolt for the back door tomorrow," he said, nailing it shut. And that window, where that night I kept my light on, every time the floor creaked or the house shifted, my breath caught. I didn't fall asleep until after 3 a.m., and when I did, I dreamed of standing at my own bedroom window, looking out, only to see a camera flash in the darkness. Monday morning came too early. I skipped the bus and let Dad drive me to school. We didn't talk much. He just kept drumming his fingers on the steering wheel at red lights, his jaw tight. When I got home that afternoon, the house felt just as I'd left it. No muddy prints, no open doors. But when I went upstairs, something small and out of place caught my eye. The stack of prints on my desk had been moved. Not much, just an inch or two, like someone had flipped through them and put them back. I called Kramer right away. He came by within 20 minutes, his cruiser parked at the curb like a warning sign. "You sure you didn't move them?" he asked. I'm sure. I haven't touched them since yesterday. He nodded slowly, looking toward the window. He's careful, and he's bold. We'll add it to the report. If he's coming back, that night, Dad didn't let me stay in the house alone. We ordered takeout, watched TV with the volume low, and left the porch light blazing. At 10 p.m., he walked the yard with a flashlight, checking behind the shed, under the deck. It was after midnight when I heard it again. A knock, faint but deliberate. This time not at the door or window, but at the wall. 3 slow taps. I froze in bed, my eyes fixed on the dark hallway beyond my doorway. I didn't get up. I didn't call out. Eventually the taps stopped, replaced by the soft crunch of footsteps in the yard. In the morning, Dad found a single Polaroid tucked under the windshield wiper of his truck. It was me again. Taken the night before, through my bedroom window, the curtains drawn halfway. My face was in shadow, but my eyes were open. The next week blurred into a mix of police visits, restless nights, and me avoiding my own room like it was a trap I'd accidentally built for myself. Dad stayed home more, calling in favors to swap shifts, but I could tell he was stretched thin. Kramer came by again on Thursday with an update, or maybe just to check that I was still holding together. We've got no match on the prints from the Polaroid, he said. If this guy's in the system, he's not in our county. That didn't make me feel better. It made me realize how small the net was. Saturday afternoon, Dad and I were in the driveway fixing the hinge on the front gate when a neighbor from 2 streets over stopped by. She'd read about the break-ins in the paper and wanted to tell us she'd seen someone standing at the edge of our yard earlier in the week. Tall, wearing a dark hoodie. She couldn't see his face, but she'd noticed something shiny in his hand. Could have been a phone, she said. Could have been a camera. That night, I slept on the couch in the living room with the TV on low. Around 1 a.m., the motion light in the backyard flared. Dad grabbed the flashlight and went out the back door, but the yard was empty. The only sign anyone had been there was a single muddy boot print on the deck. We didn't see him again after that. The police kept patrolling for a while, but by November, they'd moved on to other calls. Life was supposed to go back to normal, but it didn't. Not really. By Christmas, I'd packed away my Nikon and the rolls of film. Every time I saw a camera, I thought about the way that man had stood in my hallway shadow, watching me like I was the one in the frame. Years later, I moved out, went to college, lived in apartments with locks you could open with a credit card. But I always checked the windows first, always kept the blinds closed, always made sure the back door was locked, then checked it again 15 minutes later. Some people say you grow out of fear. I think you just grow around it like a tree bending around a nail hammered into it years ago. The nail stays. You just learn how to keep living with it there. When something feels wrong, it usually is. People will tell you you're overreacting, that you're imagining things. But it's better to be the person who makes the call than the person who wishes they had. Trust your instincts, they're there to keep you alive. When you grow up in a place like Marion Hollow, you get used to the kind of quiet that city people find unnerving. There aren't any hums of traffic or echoes of sirens, just wind in the trees, the occasional scrape of a snowplow, and the crunch of boots on frozen ground. I'd lived there my whole life, though lived might be a generous word. The winters had a way of swallowing whole seasons, making months blur together in a white haze. After my parents' divorce, Dad and I settled into a rhythm. He worked for the county, clearing roads when storms rolled through, which meant a lot of nights alone for me in our drafty 2-story house. He trusted me to be independent, but that didn't mean I had free rein. In fact, I was still paying for skipping school the week before, grounded, stuck at home with nothing but old DVDs and my phone for company. It was one of those February nights when the snow made the air glow blue right before sunset. Dad had left around 4 to get ahead of the storm, and I'd spent the first couple hours curled on the couch with a blanket wrapped around me, half watching a movie I'd seen a dozen times. Around 6, the wind started rattling the loose railing on the porch, the sound carrying through the walls like someone shaking a chain-link fence. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Don't forget history project tomorrow. Oh, and lock your doors. People breaking into houses near Hollow Road Trail." That made me laugh. "No one cares enough to rob us," I typed back. The truth was, we didn't have much worth stealing. The TV was a hand-me-down from my uncle, my laptop had a cracked screen, and Dad's idea of valuables was a good set of wrenches. Still, after I hit send, I wandered through the house double-checking the locks. That's when I saw it. Faint, muddy smears on the kitchen linoleum. They were small, more like prints from work boots than sneakers. Dad never tracked in snow. He always left his boots in the mudroom. I bent down, touched one. Cold, damp. I told myself I'd probably done it earlier without noticing, but my chest felt tight, like I was holding my breath without realizing it. At 7:05, the landline rang. No one ever called it unless it was Dad or a telemarketer. "Kiddo," Dad's voice said. "How's the storm looking there?" Hey, relieved, I started telling him about the wind and the footprints, but he cut me off sharply. "I never called you. I'm still out plowing. Don't answer the door. I'm on my way." Wait, the line went dead before I could speak. The caller ID had read, Eric J. Dad saved contact. I stood there with the phone pressed to my ear long after the dial tone faded, listening to the house breathe in the wind. The knock came 13 minutes later. It wasn't at the front door, the one with the glass pane and the porch light above it. It was at the side door, half hidden from the road, and almost never used. It was a light knock, uncertain, like the person wasn't sure they wanted me to answer. I stayed in the living room, my fingers tightening around Dad's old baseball bat. The knock came again, slower this time. Then nothing. For a while, the only sound was the ticking of the clock in the kitchen. Then I heard something upstairs, the metallic slide of a drawer opening. Not slamming, not rummaging, just opening. There shouldn't have been anyone upstairs. I called Sarah. "If I hang up, call the police," I whispered. She asked what was going on, but I muted the phone and started up the stairs, moving slow, my bare feet cold against the wood. Halfway up, I could see my bedroom door standing wide open. I always closed it before going downstairs. A shadow shifted across the doorway. Before I could turn, a man's voice floated out, quiet but deliberate. "Why'd you hang up earlier?" I didn't answer. I ran. Down the stairs, through the front hall, fumbling with the deadbolt before yanking the door open and bolting into the snow. The cold bit into my feet, but I didn't stop until I was halfway to the neighbor's yard. By the time the police arrived, less than 4 minutes later, the house was empty. No footprints except mine in the fresh snow. No sign of the man. But they did find my phone's settings had been tampered with. The earlier call, the one that sounded like Dad, the caller ID had been manually changed. That meant whoever it was had been inside the house before I even picked up the phone. The police worked the house for over an hour, their boots leaving wet trails across the floor. I sat on the couch wrapped in a blanket, answering their questions in short bursts because every time I spoke, I imagined that man's voice answering back from upstairs. One officer, a younger guy with close-cropped hair, asked me to walk him through it again. I told him about the call, the knock, the drawer, the shadow. I told him how the voice had sounded. Calm, almost casual. "Could it have been a friend playing a prank?" he asked. I almost laughed. Break in just to scare me. None of my friends know how to hack a caller ID, and none of them would. They didn't find any sign of forced entry, but that didn't mean much. Our side door's lock was old. The key stuck half the time. Whoever it was could have picked it easily. Dad got home while they were still there. His county plow truck was parked at an angle in the driveway, hazard lights cutting through the falling snow. He came in, cheeks red from the cold, eyes scanning the room like he was ready to fight whoever had been inside. "You okay?" he asked, and I could tell he was forcing his voice to sound calm. "I'm fine," I said, though my hands were still shaking under the blanket. The officers explained the caller ID thing. Dad's jaw tightened. So you're telling me someone was in here long enough to mess with her phone, then hung around upstairs until she caught on? That's what it sounds like, the older officer said. They advised us to replace our locks, check our windows, maybe install an alarm system. Then they left, their tire tracks filling with snow before the tail lights disappeared. Dad stayed up the rest of the night. He didn't say it, but I knew he was listening for the same things I was. The creak of the floorboards, the rattle of the porch railing, the sound of someone moving where they shouldn't be. The next morning, we replaced the locks on every door. Dad even screwed a wooden dowel into the frame of the side door so it couldn't be opened from the outside at all. Still, the house felt thinner somehow, like whatever barrier had been keeping the outside world from getting in had been cracked, and now everything, cold, wind, strangers, could slip through. That night I slept in the living room with the TV on low. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that open doorway upstairs, that shadow moving across it. And always, that voice. Why'd you hang up earlier? 2 days later, the police called with an update, or what they called an update. No one in the area had reported seeing a stranger near the house. None of the neighbors had noticed anything unusual, though Mrs. Klein next door mentioned she'd heard a knock on her back door the same night just before 8. She hadn't answered it. Dad didn't like that. Means they were still in the neighborhood after you ran out, he muttered. We kept the curtains closed after that. Even in the daytime, I didn't like the idea of someone being able to see in. Sarah came over once, but she kept glancing at the staircase like she expected someone to come down it. The worst part was the phone. I couldn't bring myself to answer it. Even when it was just Dad calling from work, I let it ring until the voicemail picked up, then called him back. I didn't want to hear that voice again, even if I knew it wasn't real. One evening, about a week after it happened, Dad found me sitting on the couch with all the lights on. You can't live like this forever, he said. I know. He sat down next to me, resting his elbows on his knees. Look, I've been thinking, maybe we should move. Somewhere closer to town. Less space for someone to sneak around without being noticed. I wanted to say yes right away, but something in me resisted. Marion Hollow was home for better or worse. Moving wouldn't erase what happened. It would just change the view from the window. We didn't move, but we did start locking the doors even when we were both home. Dad bought a motion sensor light for the side door and a cheap camera that sent video to his phone. I knew it wouldn't stop someone determined to get in, but it felt like putting up a wall, even if it was just a thin one. Still, some nights, I woke to the sound of knocking. I'd lie there in the dark, my heart racing until I convinced myself it was just the wind. But deep down, I knew the truth. The real danger wasn't outside anymore. It had already been in the house. The weeks turned into months. The snow melted and spring nudged its way into Marion Hollow, but the chill inside me stayed. I tried to get back to normal. School, friends, even my part-time job at the local grocery store. But something had shifted. I stopped feeling safe in my own home. Dad noticed too. One evening as we sat eating dinner, he said, distant, I know what happened. Shook you. You're quieter than usual. More, I nodded, swallowing hard. I keep thinking about that night. About how close it was. About how that guy, whoever he was, could have been in my room, watching me. He put down his fork and reached across the table. Be scared. You don't have to pretend you're not. We can't let this control us. But it's okay to his words helped, but only a little. I started carrying pepper spray in my backpack and sleeping with the bedroom door locked, even when Dad was home. At night, I kept the TV or a podcast playing, anything to drown out the silence and the memories. Months later, Dad and I installed a security system. Cameras, motion sensors, alarms, the works. It was expensive, and sometimes the alarms went off for no reason, but I felt a little safer. Still, the experience changed me. I learned that sometimes danger doesn't come crashing through the front door. Sometimes it creeps in slowly, disguised as a phone call or a quiet knock. Sometimes the hardest battles are fought inside your own home and your own head. Most importantly, I learned that fear isn't weakness. It's a signal, a warning to be vigilant, to protect yourself, and to never ignore the small things that don't feel right. Today I'm older and I'm stronger. But when I see an open door or hear a knock in the dark, I remember that night. I remember how close I came to losing everything, and how important it is to listen to that quiet voice inside that says, "Be careful." Because sometimes that's what keeps you alive. Trust your instincts. Fear is not the enemy. Ignoring it is. When something feels wrong, act on it. Protect your space, your peace, and never underestimate the strength it takes to face what scares you most. I was 15 when it happened, and though I've tried to forget parts of that night, it's one I'll carry with me forever. I grew up in Ashford, Maine, a quiet harbor town where the boats bobbed gently in the docks, and the smell of salt water mixed with the faint scent of gasoline. It was the kind of place where everyone knew your name and your business, but somehow the nights always felt peaceful. At least that's what I thought. My parents had split when I was 11, and I lived with my mom in a small weathered house at the end of a dead-end street. The kind of neighborhood where streetlights flickered on uneven poles and leaves rustled in the summer breeze, but where a kid could ride a bike down the block without much worry. My mom worked 2 jobs, mostly at the diner on Main Street, so I got used to being home alone, especially in the summer when school was out and the nights stretched long and lazy. That July was unusually hot, sticky even for Maine, and the summer felt endless. I'd spend most evenings sketching in my art journal, my window cracked open to let the salty air in while the boats made their soft clinks at the harbor down the road. It was the perfect way to unwind after a day spent helping out at the diner or wandering the town with friends. But lately, the quiet felt different. Earlier that month, the local news ran a story about prowlers caught sneaking around houses late at night. The footage wasn't clear, just dark silhouettes shifting near backyard windows, but it was enough to unsettle the neighborhood. My mom dismissed it, saying it was probably kids messing around, but I couldn't shake the unease. The day my mom had to work a double shift, she reminded me as she left, "Lock the door behind me and don't leave your art stuff all over the couch. I'll be back before midnight." I smiled, waving her off. "You got it. I'll be fine." She kissed the top of my head and closed the door behind her. Alone, I settled on the couch with my journal, the faint hum of a ceiling fan overhead, the room bathed in the golden glow of a late summer evening. I didn't realize that night would change the way I saw my home forever. The hours passed slowly. I was lost in my sketches, boats, harbors, the cracked wood of docks. The breeze blew through the slightly open windows, lifting the curtains in gentle waves. Somewhere, a seagull cried out, sharp and distant. Around 8:40 p.m., I heard it, soft, metallic, a click. It wasn't loud, just enough to make me stop mid-sketch. My heart gave a little jump. "Probably just the bathroom window," I muttered to myself. The wind had been picking up earlier, and I figured the latch must have popped open. I texted my friend Luke, trying to lighten the mood. Me. "Think the wind popped my window open." Luke. "Or a seagull broke in. Wear a helmet." I laughed quietly and went upstairs to check. My room was at the end of the hall, past the bathroom, and I could hear the faint hum of the streetlight outside filtering through the window. When I pulled back the curtain, my stomach dropped. The window was open wider than I had ever left it. The sash tilted, the cool night air rushing in. My fingers trembled as I reached for the latch. It was flipped down. The window had been unlocked. I locked it back with a click and closed the curtains fast, trying to shake the feeling creeping up my spine. Maybe someone had been around earlier and forgotten to close it properly. Maybe the latch had loosened on its own. I tried to tell myself all these things. Back downstairs, I tried to focus on my drawing, but the silence felt heavier. The shadows around the room seemed thicker, darker. Then about 10 minutes later I heard it. The kitchen door handle jiggling softly, the scrape of metal against metal. Not a forceful shake, but a deliberate test. My breath caught. My phone buzzed. Mom calling. Relief flooded me. "Hey, Mom," I whispered. Silence. Then a voice. Not hers. A man's. "You shouldn't have closed the window." I dropped the phone, heart pounding like a drum in my chest. Without thinking, I bolted for the front door. I fumbled with the deadbolt, my fingers slick with sweat. The door wouldn't unlock fast enough, my whole body shook. I could hear movement, soft footsteps maybe, somewhere just beyond the walls of the house. Finally, the bolt slid back, and I threw the door open, stumbling into the warm night air. I ran barefoot across the porch, down the cracked steps, and pounded on my neighbor's door. "Mrs. Whitman, please," I cried, banging hard. After what felt like an eternity, the door creaked open. Her eyes widened and she pulled me inside without a word, locking the door behind me. She called the police immediately. I sat on her couch, trembling, trying to steady my breathing. Outside, the world seemed oblivious. Crickets chirping, a dog barking in the distance, but I knew I was no longer safe in my own home. When the police arrived, they were calm but serious. They went through the house with flashlights, checking every window and door. Outside, they found muddy footprints on the roof above my bedroom window. Somebody had climbed up the trellis, slipped the latch earlier in the day, and waited for nightfall to come back. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The next week was a blur of police reports and repairs. Mom installed bars on all the windows, changed locks, and bought a security system. The house felt less like home and more like a fortress. I didn't sleep well. Every noise startled me. The creak of a floorboard, the whistle of the wind through the cracks. I kept my curtains drawn tightly and my phone close at hand. Even during the day, I felt watched, as if eyes lurked just outside the frame of my vision. My sketches suffered. My art journal, once a source of comfort, now felt like a reminder of what had happened. Some nights when I tried to draw, my hand would freeze mid-stroke, imagining the shadowy figure on my roof, the man who had come so close. Mom tried to reassure me. Everything they can. "You're safe now. It was just one person, and the police are doing." But it wasn't that simple. I wasn't safe. Not really. Years later, I still live with the memory of that night. I'm older now, moved out on my own, but I never leave my curtains open after dark. Sometimes, when I'm sketching in the quiet of night, I hear that faint metallic click, the sound of a latch being released, and my hand freezes, pencil hovering over the page. I've learned that safety isn't just about locks and bars. It's about awareness, trust in your instincts, and never taking your security for granted. That night taught me something important. Danger doesn't always come with a shout or a forced entry. Sometimes it slips in quietly, through an unlocked window or a moment of carelessness. You can't always see the threat, but you can prepare for it. Safety is a responsibility we share every day, whether we live alone or with others. It teaches the importance of vigilance, trusting our instincts, and taking simple precautions seriously. Most importantly, it shows that even when fear tries to control us, courage and preparedness are what keep us safe. I was 13 the autumn the rain really started to settle in Oregon. Fairview was one of those small towns that felt like it existed mostly to hold its breath until summer, when tourists came through on their way to the coast or the mountains. The rest of the year, it was a quiet place where everyone knew each other, or at least thought they did. My little brother Ethan had just turned 10 that year. We shared a room in our 2-story rental at the edge of town, the kind of place that creaked in the wind and smelled like damp wood. The woods behind the house stretched thick and dark, swallowing the weak light of the street lamps, and I hated how the shadows gathered there like they belonged to something watching. Mom worked evenings at the grocery store, pulling shifts that kept her gone past bedtime. Dad hadn't been around for years, so it was just us. We kept things simple: school, homework, and the small escape of our weekend rituals. That Friday night was special. Ethan and I had cooked up a secret plan, pizza night in the living room, just us and the movies. We built a blanket fort between the couch and the TV, draping sheets and pillows over the furniture to make a little hideout where the rain's pounding wouldn't reach us. The house smelled like frozen pepperoni and melted cheese. By 7:20 p.m., we were halfway through our first movie when the landline rang. It was rare for that phone to ring these days. Ethan was shoving a slice into his mouth and looked at me with a mouthful. "Can you get it?" I pulled myself out of the fort and picked up the receiver. "Hello?" There was silence on the other end, just a pause, and then a man's voice, low, calm, and weirdly casual. "Is your mother home?" My stomach flipped. "Who is this?" He chuckled softly, like he was amused. "Tell her I'll be by soon." I hung up fast, heart pounding in my ears. Ethan's eyes were wide. "Who was that?" "Wrong number," I said, but my voice didn't sound convincing, even to me. I didn't tell Ethan what I really thought, how my skin prickled, how the warmth of our fort suddenly felt fragile, like a thin shield against something cold. The rain had started in earnest by 8:10 p.m., tapping against the windows in a steady rhythm. We were back on the couch, blankets wrapped tight around us, when I noticed the basement light flicker on. Our basement was dark and musty, lit only by a single pull-cord bulb that Mom hated to leave on because of the electric bill. The light buzzing was usually rare enough to be noticeable. "Did you turn the basement light on?" I asked Ethan. He wrinkled his nose. "No way, I don't go down there. Spiders." I laughed, trying to keep things light, but the light flicked off, and then on again, like a heartbeat in the dark. The house felt too quiet after that. Even the rain seemed to slow down outside, as if waiting for something. Around 8:30 p.m., the phone rang again. This time, Ethan nudged me. "Mom?" I grabbed the receiver, voice shaky. "Hello?" The same voice from before, smoother now, colder. "Tell your brother to come to the basement." I slammed the phone down before I could answer, forcing a smile at Ethan. "Creep messing with us." Probably just some... But my hands shook and I couldn't stop glancing toward the basement door. We locked the basement door tight, double-checked it. I grabbed Mom's old softball bat from the hall closet, the one she kept by the front door for, just in case. Ethan and I huddled in the living room, the blanket fort forgotten, the movies paused on the screen. Then, 10 minutes later, came the knocks. 3 slow, deliberate taps on the basement door. "Please tell me you heard that," Ethan whispered, eyes wide. I nodded, my grip tightening on the bat. "We're going next door. Now." We slipped on our shoes, hearts racing, and darted through the rain to the Jenkins house a few doors down. Mrs. Jenkins was kind and always kept fresh cookies in her jar. She let us in right away, eyes concerned as Ethan and I spilled out what happened. She called the police, who arrived quickly, searching the house with flashlights and careful eyes. The officers found muddy footprints in the basement, wet marks leading from the storm cellar door to the foot of the stairs. The cellar door was outside, a heavy wooden trapdoor hidden behind a row of bushes. Someone had pried it open and slipped inside, waiting. The idea made my skin crawl. Whoever it was, they had been inside our house while we were just feet away. The officers reassured us as best they could. Outside cellar door was definitely tampered with. "No signs of forced entry inside," one said. But the mom came home late that night, pale and worried. She replaced the basement lock the next day, installed extra security, and made sure the basement light stayed off. Ethan wouldn't sleep downstairs after that, and I couldn't blame him. Years later, I still remember that night vividly. Every time I see a pull-cord light bulb, I'm transported back to that basement. The dark, the soft knocking, the sound of rain outside. It wasn't just a scary night. It was a lesson about safety, about trusting your instincts when something feels off. We learned that threats don't always announce themselves with loud crashes or shouting. Sometimes they come quietly, slipping through cracks and shadows, and you have to be ready. The basement light taught me that fear can live in the smallest details, and that caution is a form of strength. Safety isn't guaranteed, but it can be protected through vigilance, trust in our instincts, and taking simple precautions seriously. It reminds us that fear is natural, but it doesn't have to control us. By facing our fears with preparedness and awareness, we can keep ourselves and those we love safe, even when danger hides in the quietest places. I didn't expect much when Mom asked me to head out to Uncle Ray's old farmhouse in Pine Hollow, Missouri. I was 17, just finishing up summer before my senior year. Mom was busy selling the place, and she wanted me to clear out whatever personal stuff was left before the realtor showed up. I figured it would be a quiet week, just me, the house, and the overgrown fields. Pine Hollow was the kind of place where you heard everything: the buzz of cicadas, the distant drone of pickup trucks, and the rustling of corn stalks in the breeze. The house sat at the end of a gravel road with neighbors a good quarter-mile away, so it was about as isolated as a place could get without being truly remote. Uncle Ray was a character, a true countryman who believed in old stories and whispered warnings. "Don't go out there at night," he told me when I visited last summer. "You won't see 'em, but they'll see you." I laughed it off at the time, just his way of keeping me inside. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something eerie about that wide field behind the house, especially as the sun dipped low and shadows lengthened. A few days before Mom sent me out, I found the back gate wide open. At first I blamed the wind or maybe a deer wandering through, but the thought kept nagging at me. Why would the gate just swing open like that? That Sunday, August 14th, started hot and humid, the kind of day where the sweat sticks no matter how much you wipe it off. Mom called me late in the afternoon just before she left for the city. "You sure you're okay out there by yourself tonight?" she asked, her voice full of worry. "I'm fine," I said, glancing at the field glowing orange in the late light. Uncle Ray's tools. "Just boxing up some of—" "All right, just lock the doors. The realtor's coming tomorrow morning." She sounded tired, maybe a little distracted. After dinner, I settled into the creaky old armchair in the living room with a paperback and a mug of iced tea. The house smelled like dust and aged wood, and the sounds of crickets and frogs seeped in through the open window. Around 8:20 p.m., the gravel driveway crunched softly under footsteps. I peeked through the front curtains, expecting to see a car or someone coming home. But there was nothing, just the empty shimmer of heat hanging in the air, the field stretching wide and still. At 9 p.m., the night grew quieter, the crickets stopped chirping, and the only sound was the rustling of the corn stalks, which suddenly felt alive with something unseen. That's when I saw him. He was standing at the far edge of the cornfield, where the rows ended and the wild grass began. The figure didn't move, just stood with his arms at his sides, facing the house. At first I thought it was a scarecrow, old and forgotten, but when I locked the back door and looked again, he had moved closer. Now he stood beside the wooden fence, his gaze fixed in my direction. I felt a chill despite the thick Missouri heat. I pulled my phone out, hoping for a call or a text to distract me. Instead, it buzzed with an unknown number. Hesitating, I answered. A calm, male voice said, "You left the back gate open again." My throat tightened. "Who is this?" "You should check your basement," he said, and then the line went dead. My heart pounded, and I locked every door and window with trembling hands. I grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen drawer and slowly crept toward the basement stairs. The basement smelled like damp earth and musty wood, colder than the rest of the house. I swept the flashlight beam across the cluttered shelves and boxes. Near the storm cellar hatch in the far corner, I saw it. Fresh, muddy boot prints pressed into the concrete floor. They led toward the stairs. I swallowed hard and bolted upstairs, grabbing my keys and throwing on my jacket. I told myself I was overreacting, but every hair on my neck stood on end. I drove down the gravel road to the nearest gas station, the one with the flickering neon sign, and waited. The county sheriff arrived soon after, a tall man with a calm, serious face. We drove back together. The field was empty, no sign of the figure. But when the sheriff pointed out the footprints circling the house, My stomach dropped. The footprints weren't just coming toward the house. They circled it more than once, as if whoever it was had been watching me for a long time. The sheriff tightened the locks and promised increased patrols. I didn't spend another night at that farmhouse. The realtor sold it quickly after that, and I moved back home. Even now, years later, whenever I pass an open field, I can't help scanning the edges, looking for a still figure watching in the shadows. That summer taught me something about fear and silence, about how some dangers don't shout. They wait quietly. Vigilance is key, especially when we feel alone or vulnerable. Danger can come from the quietest places and in the calmest voices. Trust your instincts, respect your boundaries, and never ignore the small signs that something is wrong. Safety comes not just from locks and lights, but from awareness, preparedness, and listening to the quiet warnings before it's too late. I had dreamed of living alone for as long as I could remember, but when the moment finally arrived, I wasn't entirely sure what I had signed up for. In the summer of 2019, I moved into my first townhouse in Briarwood, New Jersey. I had spent months scouring listings, balancing what I could afford with what felt like home, and finally, this 2-story place, tiny backyard, narrow basement, creaky stairs and all, felt right. My parents had 3 kids, and growing up in a chaotic, bustling household had its charm. But it left me craving quiet, solitude, a space that belonged only to me. I was 32, a freelance writer, and for the first time, the world was entirely mine to organize. The house came mostly empty, except for the furniture the previous owners had left behind. Most of it was easy to overlook, but there was one item I instantly disliked: a dark, ornate rocking chair in the corner of the basement. Dusty, faintly musty, its presence unnerved me in a way I couldn't explain. I didn't know why. Maybe it was its age, the way the wood creaked even when untouched, or the faint curl of the cushions that seemed to lean toward you, waiting. I wanted to move it, hide it, or maybe burn it. Anything but acknowledge it. Moving in was exhausting. Boxes stacked in every corner, Milo, my gray tabby cat, hiding under furniture, and the July humidity making every step a chore. That first night I needed my toolkit from the basement, so I descended the narrow stairs, flashlight in hand. The chair had shifted, just slightly, maybe 2 inches. I laughed nervously at myself. "You're tired, Clara," I whispered, but the pit in my stomach didn't disappear. The first week passed with small, inexplicable events. A pen here, a book there, objects subtly displaced. Doors I was certain I had locked were left ajar. The floorboards creaked in patterns that didn't match the house's rhythm, and Milo began hissing at empty spaces, fur on end, muscles taut, following noises I couldn't hear. One night I was at my desk when something in the corner of my eye caught a shadow gliding past the basement window. My phone had no signal in that corner, so I couldn't even text anyone. My heart hammered. "It's nothing," I told myself over and over, but nothing in my body believed it. By the second week, the unease was almost unbearable. I called Mr. Howard, my retired neighbor, for advice. "Old houses," he said with a shrug, wiping grease from his hands, "have their quirks. Don't let your imagination run wild." I thanked him politely, but his words barely touched my anxiety. Something was in my house, or something was attached to it, watching, waiting. The question wasn't if, it was how long it had been there before I noticed. Sleep became a battle I often lost. I would wake to creaks and whispers I couldn't place, sometimes even convinced Milo was responding to things I couldn't see. On a Thursday night, around 1:30 a.m., I was writing when I heard it. Slow, deliberate creaks from the basement. Milo hissed and dashed under the bed. My hands shook as I grabbed the flashlight, every instinct screaming to run. The basement smelled of mildew and dust, but the beam of my flashlight fell on the rocking chair, moving back and forth by itself. I froze, mouth dry, heart thudding, and then I saw her. A figure emerging from the shadows, frail, old, eyes sharp, glinting as if she had been waiting for me to notice. I screamed, the sound bouncing off the bare walls, and ran upstairs, slamming the basement door. My pulse thundered in my ears. The police came quickly, but when they entered the basement, it was empty. No sign of forced entry. Nothing but the still, unassuming rocking chair. The officers exchanged glances, shrugging off my report as a misunderstanding or the stress of moving in. "Old houses do that sometimes," one said. But I knew it wasn't stress. It was something else entirely. Weeks passed. I avoided the basement, sleeping with Milo curled at my feet, double-locking doors, triple-checking windows. I learned about the previous owner, an elderly woman who had cared for a relative who disappeared mysteriously before selling the house. I began to suspect that the rocking chair, the basement, and the shadows were more than coincidence. They were memory made physical, a lingering presence unwilling to leave the house. I tried to write during the day, convincing myself I was sane, but nights became a trial of courage. The feeling of being watched never left, and Milo's fur would bristle even when the house seemed quiet. I realized that living alone, something I had longed for, came with responsibilities I hadn't anticipated, not just bills or chores, but confronting the unseen. One evening I sat on the couch with Milo in my lap, staring at the basement door. "You and I whispered, "we're going to survive this, okay?" He purred softly, as if in agreement, though I suspected he understood more than I did. By mid-August, I had established a cautious routine. Daytime was safe, nights were not. I began experimenting with small rituals, leaving lights on, keeping doors locked, leaving a radio playing in the basement, anything to reassure myself that I was in control. And yet, control remained an illusion. It was a Friday night when I realized just how attached the presence in the house had become. I heard the creaks again, softer this time, as if testing my patience. I ignored them at first, telling myself it was the house settling. Milo hissed sharply, his hackles raised, and something in the pit of my stomach tightened. Summoning courage, I went to the basement again. The chair was still, but a faint outline of someone sitting seemed to hover near it. I couldn't see clearly, couldn't make sense of it, and yet I could feel her watching. I yelled, "I'm not afraid." The words sounded hollow even to my own ears. She didn't move, didn't respond, just watched. I left the basement shaking and locked the door behind me. That night, I barely slept. Every sound became amplified, the wind tapping the window, the groan of pipes, the soft shuffle of Milo's paws. During the day, I researched the history of the house, hoping for a rational explanation. The previous owner, Mr. Benson, had been quiet and private, often talking about the presence of family long gone. Locals whispered about his elderly relative disappearing mysteriously. There were no reports, no police calls, just stories that faded into memory. I realized that my fear wasn't just about a ghost, or an intruder, or even the house itself. It was about acknowledging that some things, memories, and attachments linger long after life moves on. I tried to rationalize everything. Perhaps it was exhaustion. Perhaps I was creating patterns where none existed. But rational thought collided with instinct. Milo refused to go near the basement door. I had to accept that something had imprinted itself on the house, and on me, and it wasn't going away. September brought a strange sense of routine. I avoided the basement completely, leaving it in the shadows as if that would satisfy whatever lingered there. I had begun to sleep more, though my dreams were filled with the rocking chair moving back and forth, and the glint of eyes in darkness. Milo had adapted, staying close to me, watching corners, ears twitching at sounds I couldn't hear. I invited a friend over once. Sophie, a fellow writer, stayed for coffee. She noticed the locks, the extra precautions, and raised an eyebrow. "Paranoid much?" she teased. I laughed, but my chest tightened. "You wouldn't understand," I said, though I wasn't sure I did either. That night I heard the creaks again. This time I whispered, "I see you." Nothing happened. Milo hissed and I felt strangely comforted. Acknowledgement seemed to matter. One evening, I decided to descend into the basement one last time, flashlight trembling in my grip. The chair sat still, dust motes dancing in the beam. I sat down in the wooden chair opposite it, breathing deeply. "I know you're here," I said softly. "I don't want to hurt you. I just want to live my life." The air felt colder. I didn't see her, but I felt her presence more strongly than ever. For the first time, I didn't feel fear, only a tense recognition. By the end of 2019, I had learned to live with the house and its memories. I never saw the old woman again, but I respected her space. I repaired the house, decorated with care, and kept Milo near. I realized that living alone didn't mean I could control everything. Some things weren't mine to command. They were echoes of the past, reminders that life and memory often linger where we least expect them. I often think about that summer, the fear, the sleepless nights, the creaking of the rocking chair. I understand now that living alone is not just about independence. It's about coexistence, accepting what we cannot see, acknowledging what we cannot control, and learning to respect the traces left behind by those who came before. Some houses remember their occupants long after they're gone. Some memories linger in corners, in furniture, in shadows. And sometimes, the most important lesson is learning to live alongside them without letting fear dominate your life. True courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to acknowledge it, coexist with it, and continue living fully despite it. I never thought inheriting a house would feel like stepping into someone else's memory, but that's exactly what it was. In late November of 2021, I moved into a small Victorian-style home in Asheville, North Carolina, left to me by a distant uncle I barely remembered. I was 29, recently single and desperate for solitude, hoping the quiet would help me reset after a rough breakup. My life as a photographer had always been solitary in some ways. Hours wandering abandoned buildings, framing empty streets, chasing shadows and light. But living completely alone brought a tension I hadn't anticipated. My only company was Rusty, a golden retriever who had been with me for 5 years, and whose instincts I trusted more than my own at times. The house had been empty for nearly 5 years, leaving dust and cobwebs clinging to the corners like stubborn memories. Sunlight barely penetrated the tall, narrow windows, making every space seem muted and slightly unreal. The first week was spent cleaning, sorting through my uncle's old belongings, and setting up my workspace in the attic. Among the oddities left behind, a tall, narrow wardrobe caught my attention. The wood was dark and intricately carved, charming in some ways but worn and faintly musty. The door was slightly warped, and when I touched it, the wood felt almost sticky in certain spots, as if it resisted my presence. I brushed it off as old age and placed it in my bedroom, telling myself I'd use it for storage. The first few nights were uneventful, though I began noticing small things. Rusty would growl at corners where no one was, or freeze, staring at walls or furniture as if tracking a movement I couldn't see. I laughed at myself sometimes, telling him, "Rusty, it's fine. There's nothing there." But my own unease was growing. I would wake in the middle of the night to the sound of something shifting, faint creaks almost like footsteps. The air would feel colder than the temperature, brushing my neck and making the hair on my arms stand on end. It all escalated on the third night. I was in bed, reviewing some shots I had taken that day when I heard it. A soft, rhythmic thumping from the wardrobe. At first I thought Rusty had knocked something over, but he was on the bed, growling and bristling. My heart hammered as I whispered, "Rusty, it's okay. It's just the wind." The sound didn't stop. I sat up, squinting into the dark corner of the room where the wardrobe stood. Nothing moved visibly, but the noise continued, steady and deliberate, like someone dragging their shoes across the floor inside it. I wanted to dismiss it, tell myself I was imagining things, but every instinct in my body screamed otherwise. I checked the locks and windows, reassuring myself the house was secure, but the unease didn't leave. That night, Rusty refused to sleep in his bed, curling instead between my feet and glancing repeatedly at the wardrobe. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, though the room was empty. Sleep came in fitful bursts, dreams thick with shadows that moved independently of me. I began to wonder if solitude was the wrong choice, if my desire for peace had somehow invited something else entirely into my life. A few nights later, the house made itself known in a more vivid way. I was editing photos in the living room when I glanced at a mirror and froze. Reflected behind me was the image of an old man, tall and hunched, standing perfectly still. My pulse leapt and I spun around, only to find the room empty. Rusty barked furiously, darting from room to room, ears perked, hackles raised. I tried to rationalize it, exhaustion, isolation, the way light played tricks on the glass. But my instincts were screaming the same warning they always did. By the second week, I started keeping careful notes of everything. Time, sounds, temperatures, Rusty's reactions. Everything unusual followed a pattern, mostly nighttime, often in the bedroom, always near the wardrobe. I even set up a few small motion sensor cameras in discreet corners, hoping to capture an explanation. When you're alone in a house this old, paranoia is the only companion that feels like common sense. Then came the night that pushed me to the edge. It was raining hard, the kind of rain that thrums against the roof and windows, muffling every other sound. I woke to the low creaking coming from my bedroom. My heart raced. The wardrobe door was slightly ajar. Every fiber of my body told me to run, but I forced myself to grab a flashlight. Slowly, I edged toward it. The beam shook in my grip, falling across the warped carvings, highlighting dust motes dancing in the air. The door was empty, or so I thought. A coat, old and moth-eaten, hung over the edge of the door. I hadn't placed it there. I didn't remember seeing it before. I froze, my mind cycling between logic and panic. Rusty growled low in his throat, his body tense. I spoke softly, more to myself than him. "It's okay. It's okay." But my voice sounded hollow even to my ears. Sleep became impossible. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind, every small shadow sent me into full alert. I realized I could no longer separate my imagination from reality. The house had its own rhythm now, and I was just an unwilling guest. I tried to regain some sense of control by setting up cameras throughout the house. I figured if there was someone breaking in, the footage would show it. If it was something else, maybe I could find proof, some tangible evidence to ground my sanity. A week later, I reviewed the footage. My stomach dropped. The wardrobe door opened and closed on its own, slowly, deliberately. One frame froze, a shadowy figure crouched inside, watching me. No footprints, no signs of entry, nothing to explain the presence. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours, unable to breathe. The neighbor, Mrs. Lang, an elderly woman who lived across the street, noticed my agitation. "You're not imagining things," she said when I confided a little. "That house, it's always held its memories. My brother knew your uncle. He was reclusive, kept to himself mostly, vanished without explanation in the 90s. They say the attic was his world. He didn't leave much behind." Her words sent a chill down my spine. The wardrobe wasn't just furniture. It was a relic, a vessel carrying the imprint of someone's life. Every night became a negotiation between fear and necessity. I avoided the wardrobe, slept with all doors locked, and kept Rusty close. He was my sentinel, growling at sounds I couldn't hear, watching corners I couldn't see. My photography, once a source of joy, now felt like a way to distract myself from the house, from the lingering presence that didn't want to be ignored. Days turned into weeks. I started experimenting with small rituals, leaving the wardrobe door slightly open, keeping a light on inside the bedroom, speaking aloud to the space. "I see you," I whispered one night. "I know you're here. I'm not trying to harm you." Rusty relaxed slightly, though he still watched the corners with wary eyes. That night, the usual creaks were softer, more hesitant, like a cautious acknowledgement. It was the first time I didn't feel pure fear. I began to understand that the house and its presence were intertwined. I wasn't just living in a house. I was sharing space with fragments of a life that had ended decades before, lingering in ways small and inexplicable. I could neither chase it away nor fully invite it. It was there, and I had to coexist. By the end of December, I had settled into a fragile routine. Rusty was calmer, and I had accepted the wardrobe as a silent companion. Photography became my refuge, a way to focus on creation instead of fear. I never saw the figure clearly again, but I felt its awareness in the quiet moments. The house had taught me something I didn't anticipate. Solitude isn't just about being alone. It's about living with yourself, with the past, and sometimes with presences that don't fully belong to this time. The wardrobe stood quietly, the carvings now familiar, the musty scent part of the rhythm of my life. I had learned to respect it, to acknowledge it without allowing it to dominate me. Living alone wasn't what I expected. It was more complicated, more layered, and sometimes more unsettling. Yet I survived, and with that survival came a deeper understanding of boundaries, respect, and coexistence. Some presences linger beyond life, but fear loses its power when we acknowledge the past, respect what we cannot control, and coexist with the unknown rather than fight it. I had always been drawn to historic homes. Their character, the way the wood smelled of decades, the subtle imperfections that told stories of lives long gone. So when I moved to Salem, Massachusetts, for a new software developer position in February 2020, the century-old townhouse I rented felt perfect. I was 26, fresh out of a long-term relationship, and ready for independence, though a small part of me worried about the isolation. The house was charming, but empty, creaking in ways that reminded me of the years it had witnessed. My nights were mostly spent alone, accompanied by the soft hum of my laptop as I worked late into the evenings. From the moment I stepped in, I noticed the attic hatch in the hallway ceiling. It had a single bare bulb wired years ago, but long since disconnected. I had no intention of venturing up there immediately, but curiosity nagged at me. While unpacking, I discovered an old trunk covered in dust and cobwebs. It looked like something straight out of a history museum. I considered using it for books, but decided to leave it closed while I settled in. The house was already full of creaks, shadows, and corners that seemed just a little too dark. I told myself it was just character, nothing more. The first week passed quietly, the only sounds being my typing, the hum of the heater, and the occasional creak of the floorboards. Then one evening around 11:30 p.m., I noticed a faint flicker of light coming from the attic crack. I froze. I lived alone. There were no bulbs turned on in the attic. I told myself it was the reflection from the street lamp outside, or maybe a trick of my tired eyes. But the flickering didn't stop. It was slow, deliberate, almost like someone was pacing back and forth. My stomach sank. I called my friend Marcus, trying to sound casual. "Hey, you won't believe this. I think my attic is haunted." Marcus laughed. Much. "Maybe it's a ghost haunting your laptop, man. You've been working too," I didn't laugh. The light flickered again, teasing the shadows in the hallway. Rusty, my neighbor's golden retriever who occasionally stayed with me, growled sharply from the couch. His hackles were raised. I realized even the dog sensed something wrong. I shook off the chill and told myself I was imagining things. It had to be nothing. By the third night, the light had returned. It moved rhythmically, slow, almost deliberate, like it had a heartbeat. My curiosity overpowered my fear. I waited until it flickered again, then slowly approached the attic hatch. My hand shook as I reached for the ladder. The wood was cold, the rungs uneven under my weight. When I finally shone my flashlight into the attic, I froze. Crouched just inside the hatch was a figure, a man, thin and pale, eyes dark, staring directly at me. His grin didn't reach his eyes. I nearly dropped the flashlight. My throat constricted. I slammed the hatch shut and leaned against the wall, my heart hammering. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak, every settling noise made me jump. I realized my new home wasn't just old. It carried history, secrets, and perhaps even lingering presences that didn't intend to leave. The next morning, I called the landlord, trying to remain calm. "The attic?" he said reluctantly. "Yeah, it's been sealed for years. Some break-ins a long time ago. Never caught the intruder." That explained the old trunk, the bare bulb, and the aura of abandonment. The attic had been locked to keep trespassers out, but it didn't account for the sensation that I wasn't alone. I had always loved solitude, but now it came with an undercurrent of dread. Rusty began to growl whenever we passed the hallway. At first I thought it was random, but soon I noticed patterns. Lights flickering, floorboards creaking above, and the faint sound of footsteps when the house was completely empty. I installed cameras in the hallway and living room, hoping to find a rational explanation. One night, reviewing the footage, I saw the light flicker in the same rhythm as I had observed it. In one frame, I could make out a shadow, thin and hunched, crouched near the attic entrance. There were no footprints, no evidence of entry, nothing I could show the landlord. The figure wasn't trying to harm me, but its presence was deliberate. Watching, waiting. I tried rationalizing it. Exhaustion, stress, shadows, reflections. But Rusty's fur bristling, the cold draft near the attic hatch, and that hollow feeling in my chest told me otherwise. I began sleeping with lights on, even leaving my laptop open in the living room as a sort of nightlight. The house felt alive, and I wasn't just a resident. I was part of its ongoing story. Weeks passed, and my life fell into a routine. Days at the office, evenings editing photos or writing code, nights punctuated by unease. Rusty would come to stay with me occasionally, his growls keeping me alert, reminding me that something in the house was watching. I avoided the attic, leaving it sealed, but the presence wasn't deterred. Every so often, I'd catch glimpses of flickering light, shadows moving unnaturally, or a sound that didn't belong. I began speaking aloud, half to myself, half to whatever lingered. "I see you," I whispered one evening. "I know you're here. I'm not here to hurt you." Rusty sat at my feet, ears raised, but for the first time he didn't growl. I realized that acknowledgement mattered more than fear. The house, the attic, the figure, it wanted recognition, not confrontation. I also researched the townhouse's history, reading old records and local papers, break-ins, reclusive tenants, minor accidents. The house had been standing for a century, and every occupant left a fragment behind. I had unknowingly stepped into a living history, and the figure in the attic was the most tangible part of that history. I decided to reclaim a sense of control. Motion sensor cameras, lights on timers, and keeping my workspace away from the hallway helped. I even brought small offerings of light into the attic, candles and a lantern I would leave near the hatch when I worked nearby, though never opening it. These rituals calmed me, though unease remained a constant companion. Rusty became my anchor. He would sleep at the base of the stairs, ears twitching at sounds I couldn't hear. The figure never approached aggressively, but the house had a rhythm I had to respect. I was no longer a visitor. I was a participant in its quiet, lingering memory. By late spring, I had adapted. The flickers continued sporadically, but I no longer froze in fear. I understood that the house was not hostile. It was alive with memory, echoes of the past that I could neither erase nor fully comprehend. I accepted that living alone in a historic home meant coexistence, not domination. I worked, photographed, and lived my life alongside the presence in the attic, acknowledging it without letting it control me. Every creak, flicker, and shadow became a reminder of history, of continuity, of the layers of life that remain after people leave. Solitude wasn't just being alone. It was understanding the lives that had existed before me and learning to live alongside them. True courage is learning to coexist with the unknown, respecting the past, and finding peace even when solitude brings lingering presences that cannot be controlled. I had always been the kind of person who craved peace but feared complete isolation. Growing up in a household with 3 siblings meant there was always noise, always someone needing something, and rarely a moment of true silence. By August of 2018, after a particularly painful breakup, I decided it was finally time to live alone. Portland, Oregon, had always appealed to me with its mix of greenery and urban charm, and when I found a small duplex tucked into a quiet street, I jumped at the chance. I was 34, a high school teacher by profession, and more than ready for a sanctuary of my own. The duplex itself was charming, albeit a little dated. The floors creaked when I walked across them, the hallways were narrow, and the paint in the living room had faded into soft shades of beige over decades. My bedroom was spacious and had a large built-in closet with sliding wooden doors. For someone like me, a book collector, it was perfect. I had stacks of rare editions, first prints, and novels I'd collected over the years, all patiently waiting to be stored in that closet. The first week was a whirlwind of unpacking boxes, arranging books, and exploring the space. Whiskers, my sleek black cat, was as cautious as ever, darting under furniture and occasionally hissing at corners I knew were empty. At first I dismissed her behavior. Cats were quirky, especially in a new environment, but soon subtle things began to catch my attention. Clothes in the closet weren't exactly where I had left them, and Whiskers seemed particularly agitated whenever she was near the sliding doors. Then one night around 10:50 p.m. I was settling in with a book when I heard it, soft scraping noises coming from the closet. I paused, listening carefully. The house creaked, sure, but this felt different. It wasn't the typical settling of old wood, it was deliberate, almost like something or someone was moving inside. I shook my head and laughed nervously. "It's just Whiskers," I murmured. But Whiskers wasn't in the room at the time, and the hair on the back of my neck prickled. Over the next few nights, the noises persisted. At first, I tried keeping the closet doors open. I'd stand near the bed, half expecting to see something emerge, but nothing ever did. The sound of scraping continued, faint but deliberate. My mind began racing through worst-case scenarios: intruder, burglary, harassment. It was unsettling. The thought of someone watching me in what I had thought was a private space left me feeling exposed in a way I had never experienced before. Curiosity overcame fear, and I began examining the walls around the closet. I tapped, pressed my ear against the surface, and ran my fingers along the baseboards. That's when I found it, a small, barely noticeable hole in the shared wall with the neighboring unit. I froze. My pulse quickened. Someone could be watching me while I slept. The rational part of me screamed to leave it alone, but another part wanted answers. I didn't confront my neighbor immediately, fearing the confrontation might escalate into something dangerous. Instead, I covered the hole with tape and cardboard and began documenting every incident. Doors sliding on their own, items shifted inexplicably, and Whiskers remained hyper-alert, her green eyes fixed on that wall whenever she was in the bedroom. I even installed a small camera inside the closet, pointing toward the wall, hoping to capture whatever or whoever was responsible. I was nervous, but I needed evidence. I couldn't let myself slip into paranoia without proof. The first week with the camera was tense but uneventful. I watched the footage in real time, holding my breath every time the closet doors moved. Whiskers sat nearby, occasionally flicking her tail, as if she sensed the same tension I did. The next night, however, the camera caught something that made my stomach turn cold, a shadowy figure peering through the hole. It was brief, a flicker of dark clothing and an obscured face, but it was enough to confirm my worst fears. Someone had been observing me for weeks, quietly, without my knowledge. I felt a mix of panic and anger. How long had this been happening? Was my neighbor aware, or had the previous tenants been similarly watched? The thought of someone exploiting the duplex's shared walls for voyeurism made my skin crawl. I immediately called the landlord, explaining the situation. The man was quiet on the phone, hesitant to acknowledge the seriousness of what I was describing. "We've had complaints before," he admitted reluctantly. "Old duplexes. People forget how walls work sometimes, but we'll look into it." I also began sleeping with the closet doors locked, checking every corner before bed, and keeping a lamp on near the wall. Whiskers became my unofficial security, following me from room to room and hissing whenever I approached the closet. Each night felt longer than the last, filled with the subtle sounds of the duplex settling, my mind imagining footsteps behind walls, watching eyes, the faint rustle of clothing. Despite the fear, I continued documenting everything. The footage showed small movements, shadows stretching along the wall, the subtle shifting of items near the closet, and Whiskers reacting as if she could sense the presence I could only feel. The realization that I had been spied on was both frightening and humiliating. A sense of violation lingered, a constant weight that made me jump at every creak and whisper of wind through the hall. I finally made the decision to seal the hole permanently. I used wood filler and reinforced it with a thin piece of plywood, ensuring it could no longer be exploited. It wasn't easy. I worked late into the night, Whiskers pacing nervously nearby, but I wanted to regain control of my home. Once it was done, I informed the landlord again and filed a police report. The officer who came seemed skeptical at first, but seeing the camera footage changed that. They assured me someone would check the neighboring unit, though the intruder never returned openly. Even with the hole sealed, the experience left an impression. The duplex that had promised solitude now felt fragile. Every noise was scrutinized, every creak and shadow analyzed for hidden meaning. I tried to re-establish a sense of normalcy, bookshelves organized, Whiskers calm after long periods, but it was impossible to ignore the knowledge that walls could hide secrets. I began making small changes to reclaim the space. A small motion sensor in the bedroom, extra locks on the sliding closet doors, and new habits of checking corners before going to bed. These measures didn't eliminate the fear entirely, but they gave me a semblance of control. I would still sometimes hear minor creaks, but I no longer assumed the worst. I learned to live with the tension without letting it dominate my life. The neighborhood itself was quiet and friendly, a stark contrast to the violation I felt inside my own walls. My neighbor, an elderly man who rarely spoke beyond polite greetings, seemed unassuming, almost fragile. I never confronted him directly about what had happened, though part of me wanted answers. The law had addressed the immediate threat, but the psychological residue remained. At work, I threw myself into teaching, trying to occupy my mind during the day. At home, I tried to focus on my hobbies, reading, organizing my book collection, and spending time with Whiskers. Yet the duplex had changed me. I now appreciated the fragility of privacy, the way even familiar walls could conceal threats. I felt a heightened awareness of my surroundings, a constant, low-level vigilance that was exhausting but necessary. Weeks turned into months, and life gradually regained a rhythm. Whiskers adapted too, less jittery, but still occasionally hissing at corners. The locked closet doors became part of my nightly routine, a simple act that symbolized control and safety. I came to accept that while the intruder could no longer reach me, the memory of the breach would linger. It wasn't just the act itself. It was the realization that isolation could be exploited in ways I hadn't imagined. I found myself reflecting on personal boundaries and the importance of vigilance. Living alone had always been my dream, but the experience showed me that solitude also came with responsibilities. Securing my home, understanding potential risks, and accepting that not all dangers are visible. The duplex, with its narrow walls and creaky floors, had become a teacher of caution, reminding me that even comfort can harbor unseen threats. By the end of the year, I had fully settled into the duplex, though the lessons lingered. I checked the locks nightly, double-checked corners, and kept Whiskers close when moving around the house after dark. The sense of intrusion never completely disappeared, but it became a background hum rather than a dominating fear. I realized that living alone required more than independence. It required respect for boundaries, preparedness, and acceptance that some elements of life were beyond control. Though I never saw the intruder again, the experience permanently altered my perception of privacy. The duplex, once a sanctuary, now reminded me of vulnerability and vigilance. I still loved the house and my quiet evenings with Whiskers, but I no longer took solitude for granted. It was a privilege, fragile and precious, that required constant attention and care. Privacy is a fragile gift, and true independence comes not just from being alone, but from respecting boundaries, preparing for the unexpected, and acknowledging that even familiar spaces can conceal unseen dangers. I had always longed for a place to call my own, a space that felt like a sanctuary from the chaos of city life and the constant demands of work. In October 2020, at 31, I finally moved into a quiet cul-de-sac in Syracuse, New York. After years of cramped apartments and thin walls that allowed me to hear every argument, every late-night party, I was desperate for peace. The house I rented was modest but charming, a small front porch where I could sip coffee in the mornings, an attached garage, and a neatly fenced backyard where I could plant flowers and maybe even start a small vegetable patch. Tom, my husband, traveled frequently for work, so most nights it was just me. And that was exactly how I liked it, or at least that's what I told myself. The first week was an exhausting blur of unpacking boxes, hanging artwork, and arranging my few pieces of furniture in a way that felt just right. Milo, the Bennett's golden retriever who often wandered over from next door, seemed to approve of the porch, tail wagging as I settled into my new life. The Bennetts themselves were welcoming. Retired, cheerful, and genuinely kind, they brought over homemade cookies and gave me tips about the neighborhood. It felt like I was moving into a friendly little bubble, a pocket of calm in a city that often felt too loud. But their house went empty suddenly, for reasons I never quite understood. Within a month they had moved, leaving their home dark and quiet. Initially, it didn't bother me. I thought maybe they had gone to visit family, but that calm bubble started to fray the night I noticed someone moving into the empty house. He was a man in his 40s, tall and precise, with a quiet way of moving that set my nerves on edge. He dragged large boxes into his garage, all after dark, keeping his lights off during the day. Something about him didn't feel right, though I couldn't place exactly what. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing patterns. The man seemed to appear whenever I stepped outside, his head just barely visible above the garage wall or in the shadows behind a drawn curtain. I caught glimpses of strange, heavy shadows moving behind his garage windows. Once, while painting on the porch, I had the chilling sensation of eyes on me. I froze, brush in hand, and turned slowly. The space behind his closed garage door seemed empty, yet Milo barked insistently at nothing. My heart raced. I told myself I was imagining things, that my own anxiety was getting the best of me, but deep down I knew something was off. It started with little things, a faint scraping sound at night, the occasional flicker of movement in my peripheral vision. The first few nights I tried to convince myself it was just old house noises or shadows from streetlights bouncing through the trees. But there was an intensity to it, a deliberate quality that made me check locks obsessively and keep my blinds drawn at all hours. It wasn't just my imagination. Something or someone was observing, and the thought made the peaceful cul-de-sac feel suddenly vulnerable. By the end of the first month, I realized I couldn't ignore it anymore. I called my friend Jean, who lived 2 blocks away, to come over and sit with me one evening. I needed someone to confirm that I wasn't losing it, that the way the shadows moved and the noises occurred wasn't normal. When she arrived, we spent hours watching the yard, hoping to catch a glimpse of what or who was lurking. But the man never made a direct appearance. He was careful, deliberate, silent, and precise, and it was that calculated observation that made my skin crawl. A particularly rainy night brought everything to a head. Around 1:45 a.m., I was jolted awake by faint thuds from the garage next door. I pressed my ear to the window, heart hammering in my chest. The door rattled as though someone was inside, moving heavy objects, but no lights were on. The rain made it impossible to see clearly, shadows flickering across the yard, like ghostly shapes. I debated calling the police immediately, but hesitated. What could I tell them? That I thought my new neighbor was spying on me? I wasn't sure if it was paranoia or reality. I picked up the phone and called Jean. I think something's happening next door. Can you come over? I whispered, barely moving my lips. She arrived within 10 minutes, flashlight in hand, her presence steadying me. Together we approached the garage cautiously. Every step felt amplified, the wet pavement slippery beneath our feet. We knocked on the door. No answer. The door was slightly ajar, moving gently with the wind, but that didn't explain the thuds we had heard. We stepped inside. Darkness enveloped us. The smell of damp cardboard and old wood filled the air. As our eyes adjusted, we saw stacks of boxes neatly arranged. At first glance it seemed ordinary, but then we noticed the markings, strange numbers and symbols scrawled across the boxes. Some items inside were unfamiliar, small trinkets and objects that didn't make sense. Milo barked at the edges of the room, fur bristling. "This isn't normal," Jean muttered, her voice tense. We stayed inside for a few minutes, listening to faint scraping sounds that seemed to come from deeper within the garage. But there was no one there. By morning, the van parked outside had vanished, and the man had disappeared as quietly as he had arrived. He never introduced himself, never explained, never acknowledged our presence. I felt a mix of fear, confusion, and helplessness. How long had he been watching? What was he doing with those objects? The questions circled endlessly in my mind. I called the neighborhood watch and filed a report, though I doubted it would lead anywhere. The authorities listened politely but warned me that without concrete evidence, the situation might remain unresolved. That night I triple-checked all locks, installed cameras near the garage, and kept every door in the house secured. Even small tasks, watering plants, walking to the mailbox, felt heavy with anxiety. Every shadow seemed amplified, every creak of the porch under my feet a potential warning. The incident changed the rhythm of my life. Painting on the porch, once a source of comfort, became a tense exercise in vigilance. Even the neighbor's dog Milo sensed something invisible in the yard, barking at spaces that appeared empty. I began to wonder if solitude was truly safe, or if living alone was a vulnerability I had underestimated. My haven had become a space layered with observation, manipulation, and uncertainty. Days turned into weeks, and I learned to adapt, though unease remained constant. The cameras I installed captured only fleeting shadows, glimpses of movement that vanished before I could understand them. The markings on the boxes remained a puzzle, and I began noticing small inconsistencies in my yard. Displaced stones, bent branches, footprints that didn't match any dog or human. The cul-de-sac, once a sanctuary, now felt like a stage set, and I was an unwilling participant in a story I didn't understand. I spoke to Jean often, sharing observations and fears. "You're not imagining it," she said one evening after reviewing camera footage with me. "There's something off. Someone's been here, moving things, watching. I've seen enough true crime to know the patterns." Her reassurance helped, though it did nothing to eliminate the lingering dread. I began keeping a journal, cataloging every anomaly, every sound, every glimpse of movement. It became a record, a way to reclaim some sense of control over a situation that felt entirely uncontrollable. Sleep became fractured. I would wake at odd hours, convinced I heard the faint thud of boxes or the creak of a door I had triple-locked. At first, I tried rationalizing: wind, animals, plumbing. But rationalizations fell flat when Milo's fur would bristle and his low growl would echo in the quiet. I realized that the presence wasn't necessarily physical, or at least not always, but psychological. The man, whoever he was, had inserted himself into my awareness, into my daily life, without ever stepping into it fully. I started taking precautions I hadn't thought necessary before. Additional locks, sensor lights, and even a small motion alarm on the porch. Each measure provided a sense of control, but control only masked the underlying truth. Someone had breached my space and left a permanent mark on my sense of security. The cul-de-sac wasn't simply a neighborhood. It was a space where unknown forces could act invisibly, shaping my days and nights without accountability. By midwinter, I had adapted, though cautiously. I could water my garden, retrieve the mail, and walk to the corner store without panic. But vigilance had become second nature. Every interaction with the surrounding houses carried a shadow of suspicion. The new neighbor never appeared, yet his impact lingered in every creak, every movement, every wind-blown shadow. I accepted that I might never understand his intentions or his methods. Jean and I continued our nightly reviews of camera footage, though we rarely saw anything concrete. Occasionally, a shadow or flicker would appear, fleeting and incomprehensible. I learned to observe without reaction, to maintain routines that asserted my presence and control. The act of vigilance became a quiet rebellion, a way to declare, even silently, that my space remained mine. I also began focusing more on the positive: painting, reading, gardening. The rituals of home ownership became grounding, anchoring me in reality even as the unseen presence reminded me of fragility. Milo remained a constant companion, a reminder that even in the face of uncertainty, there was a reliable thread of companionship and security. By spring, I had found equilibrium. The cul-de-sac, though shadowed by uncertainty, became a home in its own right. I never saw the man again, nor did I uncover the meaning behind his nocturnal activities. But the experience had changed me profoundly. I had learned that solitude, while desirable, carried vulnerabilities that required vigilance. I had learned to document, to secure, and to respect the fragility of personal space. Even months later, I sometimes caught myself pausing at the garage, feeling a subtle tension in my chest. I still triple-checked locks, monitored camera feeds, and kept an attentive eye on the yard. But I also appreciated the sanctuary I had created, fragile, imperfect, yet mine. The experience had not stripped me of my peace entirely. It had taught me how to protect it. True security is a combination of vigilance, awareness, and respect for personal boundaries. Solitude can be a gift, but it is fragile, and safeguarding it requires proactive care and mindfulness of the unseen risks around us. Moving to Maple Street should have felt exciting, like starting a new chapter in my life, but it didn't feel that way at first. I'm Julian Hayes, 13, and I'd spent most of my life moving from apartment to apartment with Mom, Marissa, and my little sister Clara. We'd never had a proper house until now. Modest, 2 stories, a small backyard, and neighbors who seemed just close enough to wave, but far enough to mind their own business. I was happy about my room. Shelves lined with miniature model airplanes, a workbench covered in paints, glue, and tiny screws. This was my zone. For the first time, I felt like I had control over a space that was completely mine. Mom was thrilled, of course, but she had a night shift schedule that often left me and Clara on our own in the evenings. She tried to make everything feel normal, cooking dinner before heading to the hospital and reminding us to lock doors, feed Scout, and finish homework. Clara, at 8, was mostly happy to explore the backyard or watch cartoons. I, on the other hand, noticed the details. The slight tilt of the neighbor's blinds, the occasional shadow moving across the windows, and the silence that seemed too heavy on one side of the street. They never waved, they never spoke. It was unnerving. A few weeks into living there, Mom had a 12-hour shift, and it was my first real night alone. I set up my paint tray and model plane on the workbench, trying to immerse myself in the delicate brush strokes and glue applications. That's when I heard it. A faint tapping, tap, 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 coming from the back window. My heart skipped. At first, I convinced myself it was rain, a branch, anything ordinary. But the tapping continued, slow, deliberate. I froze. I edged closer to the blinds, trying to peek without being noticed. That's when I saw it, a dark figure standing motionless near the neighbor's driveway. I couldn't make out features, just a silhouette, and it was staring in our direction. My pulse spiked. Scout growled low in his throat, ears pinned back, hackles raised. The sound made my stomach tighten. I whispered, "It's okay, Scout, stay calm," though my voice trembled. The tapping stopped, but a faint smoke scent drifted in from the side yard. Instinct screamed at me that something was wrong. I grabbed my phone to call 911, but the line was dead. Panic took over. Scout barked sharply and I grabbed his leash, running to the backyard, trying to locate the source of the smoke. Flames licked the corner of the neighbor's garage. My stomach dropped, adrenaline surging. I yelled for Clara, who was in her room watching TV, to come outside. She scrambled out, eyes wide with fear. Firefighters arrived in minutes, but to me, it felt like hours. They sprayed water, smoke curling upward into the dark night. The garage was badly damaged, and I learned later that it was no accident. The police explained it was a targeted arson attack related to a long-standing dispute over property ownership in the neighborhood, something I had overheard adults whispering about but never understood completely. Mom returned home later, exhaustion and shock etched across her face. She hugged Clara first, then me, holding us close as if she could absorb all the tension and fear herself. I wanted to cry but didn't. I just clung to Scout, feeling the warmth of the hose-soaked yard and the faint smell of burnt wood. Maple Street looked calm again, quiet as if nothing had happened, but I knew better. That night I realized how quickly ordinary life could flip, how thin the line between safety and danger really was. After that night, nothing felt normal. I found myself double-checking locks, peering through blinds at every rustle of shadow, listening for the faintest hint of footsteps outside. Mom tried to reassure me, but I could see the tension on her face. She told me to focus on my models, to let the stress roll off me, but my hands shook every time I heard the wind brush the trees or the faint creak of the garage door next door. Scout refused to go near the fence without me, growling whenever he caught a movement. I started keeping a journal, logging everything unusual I noticed. The time the tapping started, smoke smell in the yard, glimpses of silhouettes. Writing it down made me feel like I had some control, like I wasn't just a bystander in a story I didn't want to be part of. Clara didn't understand. She wanted to play or watch TV, laughing as if nothing mattered, but I couldn't. Something about being 13 and responsible for the safety of your family made every creak, every shadow, feel amplified. I tried to distract myself with model airplanes, painting wings, attaching tiny propellers, gluing pieces together with careful precision. It helped sometimes. I'd sit for hours, focusing on details, letting my brain lock onto something I could manipulate. But even then I would catch myself glancing at the window, thinking I saw the neighbor's darkened garage or a shadow that wasn't there. One evening, while finishing a model, I heard a scrape along the driveway. Not like last time, but something softer, almost deliberate. Scout barked and darted to the door. I tiptoed to the window, holding my breath. A pair of legs were visible, dark jeans and shoes, but no one else. I blinked and they were gone, leaving only the faint smell of smoke. My stomach knotted. Maple Street might look calm, but it wasn't safe. The lesson I had learned that night was still fresh, raw. Danger could be silent, invisible, yet right next door. Over the next month, the fire left more than just charred wood behind. The memory lingered, creating tension in our home. Mom adjusted her night shifts where she could, but it wasn't enough. Clara kept asking questions, curious about what had happened, but I realized early on that adults often lie to shield children from the full truth. I told her it was an accident, that the firefighters handled it. It was partially true, but I kept the fear to myself, locking it away as I focused on controlling what I could. My models, the locks, Scout. I noticed more subtle changes in the neighborhood. Mailboxes tilted oddly, fences looked weathered, doors that should have been closed seemed ajar for no reason. Shadows moved in places they shouldn't. I began taking nightly walks with Scout, trying to keep an eye on things. Sometimes I saw movement in the neighbor's yard, shapes shifting silently, and I would freeze, heart pounding. I never approached. I had learned the lesson that curiosity sometimes brings more danger than knowledge. One night, around midnight, I woke to a smell of smoke again. My heart raced as Scout barked and growled at the window. I grabbed a flashlight and my phone, though the lines often went dead, and peeked outside. Nothing was burning this time, but a faint outline of someone crouched by the garage caught my eye. I froze. The figure vanished when I blinked. I didn't call for help immediately. I simply stayed put, watching, waiting, heart hammering. That night, sleep didn't come until hours later. Months passed. The fire had been contained, the neighbor investigated, but Maple Street had changed in my mind. I still painted models, glued wings together, and crafted planes, but every movement outside reminded me to be vigilant. Life continued. Mom returned to her shifts. Clara grew oblivious to my anxieties, and Scout remained my protector. I understood that fear could be managed, channeled into focus, and that control over small things, like miniature planes, could give you power in a world that sometimes feels unpredictable. Maple Street appeared calm, friendly even, but I knew now that danger could lurk behind silent windows and drawn curtains, waiting for a moment when no one expected it. Even in familiar, peaceful places, unseen dangers exist. Awareness, preparedness, and the ability to focus on what you can control are vital. Fear is natural, but it can be transformed into vigilance and resilience, turning uncertainty into strength. I've always been the type of person who likes control. 16 years on this planet, and I thought I had a pretty good handle on things. Schoolwork, guitar practice, and even keeping my little brother Eli in line whenever Mom and Dad went out. But control is an illusion. At least that's what I realized the night everything changed. It was a chilly November evening in 2025. My parents had flown to Seattle for a last-minute business trip, leaving me home alone at 408 Elmwood Drive. Eli was at our aunt's for the night, which should have made things easy. Peace and quiet. Normally, I'd take the opportunity to sit in my room, posters plastered across the walls, guitar in hand, and practice until my fingers hurt. Tonight, though, something felt off. Maybe it was the wind rattling the window panes, the way the radiator groaned, or just that uneasy feeling I sometimes get when no one else is around. I was tuning my guitar when the landline rang. The number was unfamiliar, and I figured it was a wrong call. I picked it up casually. "Hello?" My voice echoed strangely in the empty apartment. Heavy breathing answered me. That was it. No words, just slow, labored breathing that seemed almost deliberate. I froze. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice shakier than I wanted. Silence. I hung up, telling myself it was some prank, maybe a telemarketer with a malfunctioning mic. Minutes later, the phone rang again. Hesitant, I answered, pressing the receiver to my ear like it might bite me. A voice barely above a whisper hissed, "I see you. I'm in the kitchen." My stomach turned. "This isn't funny," I said, heart hammering. I jumped up and checked the kitchen. Nothing, not a sound. The knives gleamed harmlessly in their block, and the refrigerator hummed. Then it happened again. The voice detailed my movements. Now on the couch, by the guitar, behind the curtains. Each description hit like a punch to the chest. I gripped my baseball bat, the one Dad insisted I keep for emergencies. I crept slowly through the apartment, checking every shadow, every corner. My own pulse felt deafening in the silence. When I reached the living room, I froze. My reflection stared back at me from the TV screen, but behind it, in the darkened corner, a crouched figure barely moved, eyes seemingly locked on mine. For a moment, time stopped. My brain screamed, "Run!" But my feet felt rooted to the floor. Instinct finally kicked in. I bolted, slamming the door behind me, fumbling with the lock. Scouted down the hallway, stairwell, and finally burst into the lobby. The night shift security guard looked up, startled. "Nathan, what's wrong?" I gasped out my story, unable to stop trembling. He radioed the police immediately. By the time the officers arrived, the apartment was empty. No sign of forced entry. Nothing. But forensic evidence later revealed tiny, muddy footprints near the back entrance. Someone had been inside, moving silently, just beyond my perception. My sense of control shattered. The days after that night were a haze. Sleep became a stranger, and the apartment, once my sanctuary, felt claustrophobic, like walls could close in at any moment. I left lights on everywhere, double-checked locks multiple times before bed, and kept the baseball bat by my side. Even my guitar lost its charm. The familiar strumming felt hollow when I imagined someone silently watching from the shadows. I talked to Mom on the phone constantly. "Nathan, you're overthinking," she said at first. But when I recounted the footprints and the whispered messages, her tone shifted. "We'll install cameras," she promised. And we did. Motion sensor cameras went up in the living room, hallway, and kitchen. The footage was unsettling. Nothing unusual at first, but every few hours, the cameras picked up faint, almost imperceptible movements, like shadows shifting without reason. The paranoia bled into school life. I'd jump at the slightest noise in the hallway, imagine classmates sneaking into my backpack, or visualize strangers hiding just out of sight. Friends noticed. "Dude, calm down," my best friend Alex said one afternoon. "It's an apartment. You're safe." But he didn't understand. Safety is relative, I learned. Absolute safety doesn't exist when someone can invade your space without warning, without leaving obvious traces. Scout, our golden retriever, became my anchor. His growls, low and warning, guided me. He seemed to sense when someone, or something, wasn't right. Some nights I'd follow him around the apartment, flashlight in hand, checking windows and doors, waiting for movement that never came. One evening, around 2 a.m., the phone rang again. I jumped so hard I nearly dropped it. "I know you're awake," the whisper hissed. "I see you." The sound made my blood run cold. I left it off the hook and never picked it up again. From that moment, my only communication was with the cameras and Scout. Weeks passed, and I tried to reclaim some normalcy. School, homework, and music offered brief relief, but the apartment always reminded me of that night. I avoided the back door entirely, refusing to open it even for fresh air. I even rearranged furniture to block sightlines into the living room. Every noise became a threat, every shadow a potential intruder. I realized my fear wasn't irrational, it was survival. Someone had been there, creeping silently, watching, tracking my every movement. I learned to trust instincts over logic, to respond to gut feelings even when they seemed paranoid to others. One night, I stayed up recording the apartment with every camera, determined to catch anything unusual. Hours passed, and I almost dozed off when a frame froze my heart. A shadow moved in the hallway, fleeting but distinct. Nothing else appeared in the footage. No face, no body, just a shifting darkness. My stomach twisted. Someone had been inside without my knowledge. I called the police again, but the evidence was slim. The footprint analysis had been inconclusive. Still, I knew the truth. My home, my safe place, had been invaded. I could never unsee it, never feel entirely secure again. Months later, I adjusted. Lights stayed on, locks were checked religiously, and Scout became both protector and companion. I returned to my guitar, strumming more carefully, almost ritualistically. The apartment remained my space, but a lesson lingered. Solitude can be deceptive. You can be alone yet observed, confident yet vulnerable. Awareness, preparation, and respect for your environment became part of daily life. I still flinch at phone calls from unknown numbers. I check shadows twice, listen for the softest sounds. But I also learned resilience. the ability to act under fear, to reclaim control in moments where it feels like none exists. The apartment no longer terrifies me the way it did, but I'll never forget how quickly ordinary life can become extraordinary danger when someone else's presence goes unseen. True safety isn't guaranteed by walls or locks. It comes from vigilance, preparedness, and trusting your instincts. Fear can be overwhelming, but when channeled wisely, it strengthens awareness and resilience, turning vulnerability into actionable caution. I had always dreamed of having a place to call my own. When I first walked into the house at 57 Cedar Lane, Eugene, Oregon, in April 2023, it felt like stepping into a dream I had been saving for years. At 25, I'd spent most of my life either living with my parents or bouncing between roommates, never truly alone. This was mine, my walls, my floorboards, my windows. The first night, I stayed up arranging my sketches along the walls, placing my thrifted furniture exactly where I wanted it. The room smelled faintly of cedar and fresh paint. I could imagine myself here, painting late into the night with only my favorite music for company. The first couple of nights were quiet, too quiet, and I reveled in it. But by the third night, unease began to creep in. I was unpacking boxes in the bedroom, humming along to a soft tune on my speakers, when I heard it, a creaking above me. At first, I paused and shook my head. Houses settle, I told myself. Old houses like mine make sounds. But then it came again. A low thump followed by a scuffle. I froze, letting my ears adjust to the silence that followed. I called my parents, trying to make it sound casual. "It's probably just the attic." I laughed, but my voice wavered. They reassured me, but I could hear the concern beneath their words. I called a pest control company the next day. Their technician poked around in the attic, checked the insulation, and assured me there were no rats, no raccoons, nothing that could explain the noises. That's when I realized I wasn't imagining it. Someone, or something, was in the attic. Curiosity overpowered my fear. I got a flashlight and my old baseball bat from high school, the one I kept for emergencies. My hands shook as I climbed the ladder, each step creaking under my weight. The attic smelled of dust and old wood. I pressed the flashlight against the far corner, heart hammering, and that's when I noticed the wall panel, slightly warped, as if it had been moved recently. I took a deep breath and pushed it aside. Behind it was a small space, just large enough to crouch in. Blankets were piled in one corner, food wrappers scattered across the floor, and a few personal belongings, like an old backpack and a tattered journal. My stomach turned. I wasn't alone. A low, raspy voice came from the shadows. "Who are you?" My heart skipped a beat. Out of the darkness, a disheveled woman emerged. Her eyes were wide, fearful, and wild. I live here," she whispered, almost apologetically. Panic surged through me. I froze, gripping the bat tighter. "You can't live here. What are you doing?" I demanded, though my voice shook. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she slumped against the wall, mumbling incoherently. I backed down the ladder, locked myself in my bedroom, and called 911. The police arrived within minutes. Marina, as she was later identified, was taken into custody. The officers explained that she had a history of trauma and homelessness, which had led her to hide in my attic. Even after she was gone, the house felt different. I installed new locks, reinforced the attic panel, and triple-checked every door and window. I began writing in a journal every night, trying to process the fear that lingered. The experience had shattered my sense of complete safety, and I knew I'd never take solitude for granted again. Days passed, and I tried to reclaim the excitement I had felt when moving in. I painted the walls, arranged my furniture, and set up my workspace by the window, hoping the sunlight would chase away the lingering fear. But at night, every creak and shift in the floorboards made me tense. Scout, the neighbor's dog that wandered occasionally, would growl outside my window, and I would find myself checking the locks for the third, fourth, even fifth time. I talked to the police detective who had handled Marina's case. "It's unlikely she'll come back," he said. "She's been placed in temporary housing and offered counseling. You're safe now." I wanted to believe him, but every time I climbed the attic ladder to retrieve something, my hands trembled, my imagination conjuring shadows moving behind the walls. One night I decided to confront my fear directly. I brought a flashlight, my bat, and my cat Milo, who usually stayed away from the attic. Milo perched on my shoulder as I slowly pushed open the reinforced panel. Everything was empty, blankets gone, nothing but dust and old spider webs. My heartbeat slowed and I laughed nervously. "It's just you and me now," I whispered to Milo. Yet even as I said it, the silence felt heavy, almost watchful. I realized that living alone wasn't just about solitude, it was about vigilance. I couldn't just relax completely, not yet. The house had a history now, and I was aware that someone could occupy spaces I thought were mine in ways I couldn't foresee. Weeks went by, and I tried to build routines that reminded me of control. I painted every evening, sometimes until 2 a.m., with soft jazz playing, lights all around the room. I kept a log of noises, small movements, and strange occurrences, documenting every anomaly. Milo became my constant companion, circling the rooms, sensing what I could not. It wasn't just the attic anymore. Sometimes I'd hear faint scuffling in the basement or a whisper-like sound from the kitchen. I reminded myself logically that it could be the house settling, plumbing, or rodents. But after what happened with Marina, I couldn't dismiss instinct entirely. I invested in cameras, motion sensors, and even a small security system, creating a sense of order and reassurance. One rainy evening, while I was painting by the window, I noticed a shadow flicker across the backyard. My stomach twisted. I grabbed the bat and crept toward the sliding glass door. Nothing. The rain had created strange shapes with the porch light. Still, the experience reminded me that even my well-secured home could be infiltrated if I wasn't careful. I spent the next few days reinforcing doors, locking windows, and checking the attic panel 3 times a day. My independence, which had once felt exhilarating, now came with responsibility and constant awareness. I had learned the weight of living alone, how every sound could be meaningful, and how quickly security could be compromised. Months later, life returned to a semblance of normalcy. I painted, sketched, and decorated, finding comfort in routines and small victories. I could sleep without panic, though I kept the attic panel locked. Milo would settle beside me as I worked, a reassuring presence. Occasionally, I still heard a creak, a faint thud, or a scratching noise, but I had tools, locks, and systems to handle them. Living alone taught me more than independence. It taught me vigilance, resilience, and respect for personal space. Safety isn't absolute. It's a combination of preparation, awareness, and instinct. My first months alone had been frightening, but they also shaped me into someone more mindful, cautious, and aware of the fragile line between security and intrusion. Independence carries responsibility. True safety comes not from walls alone, but from vigilance, awareness, and the courage to confront fear. Being alone requires both freedom and preparation, reminding us that personal security is a fragile balance and resilience is key to maintaining it. I had babysat plenty of times before, but that rainy October evening of 2024 at 132 Willow Creek Drive in Richmond, Virginia, felt different from the moment I stepped inside. I was 19, a college student majoring in literature, and I had a reputation among parents for being cautious and responsible. Babysitting courses and years of practice had made me confident in most situations, but something about that house on the quiet cul-de-sac unsettled me the instant I saw it. The house was large and elegant, with pale yellow siding slick with rain and a neat porch lined with planters. The twins, Liam and Sophie, were cheerful as they ran ahead, jumping over puddles with their tiny rain boots. Their parents explained the schedule: bedtime by 8:30, lights out by 9, and no wandering in the kitchen while they were gone. I assured them I understood and would take good care of the kids. Once the parents left, I felt the first wave of isolation hit me. The quiet was heavier than expected, the constant patter of rain on the roof the only sound. I guided Liam and Sophie through their bedtime routine, tucking them in with bedtime stories and soft songs. Once they were asleep, I poured myself a cup of tea and settled on the living room couch with my notebook. I wanted to read, maybe jot down a few ideas for my creative writing class. That's when I noticed it. A flicker in the reflection of the glass by the porch. At first I thought it was a trick of the shadows, but then I saw him. A man, standing perfectly still in the yard, staring at the house. His dark clothes were plastered to him from the rain, and his face was impossible to make out. My heart slammed against my ribs and I swallowed hard. I grabbed my phone and called the parents, explaining what I saw. "Oh, Hannah, it's probably just a neighbor walking by," Mr. Pierce said dismissively. "Don't worry so much." I tried to laugh it off, but the unease didn't leave. I couldn't focus on my notebook, couldn't enjoy my tea. Every shadow in the living room felt alive. I double-checked the locks on the front and back doors, sliding locks, windows, every one of them. The man didn't move, didn't react to the porch lights, didn't blink. I felt like a rabbit in a cage, aware that someone could try to enter at any moment. Hours passed and the rain didn't let up. I kept glancing at the window, trying to convince myself it was all imagination. But I couldn't shake the feeling that his eyes were fixed on us, following my every movement. My hand rested on the edge of the couch, brushing Liam's soft blanket, as though holding on to something tangible might keep me sane. By the time the clock edged past midnight, I felt exhausted, my nerves stretched thin. I stayed awake until I heard the car pull into the driveway. Relief flooded through me, but when I opened the front door to let the parents inside, I froze. Muddy footprints led up the steps and stopped just outside the twins' bedroom door. No one was there now, but the evidence made my stomach drop. The peers were horrified, and I felt a chill that wouldn't leave my bones. I realized how vulnerable the kids, and I, had been. The quiet cul-de-sac, the friendly-seeming neighborhood, even my own alertness, had not guaranteed safety. That night marked the first time I understood the weight of responsibility when someone else's life depended entirely on me. The next morning, sunlight streaming through the wet windows didn't bring the comfort I expected. Every shadow in the house reminded me of the dark figure I had seen. I kept replaying that moment when I spotted him on the porch, still as a statue, and the footprints outside the twins' bedroom. How had no one heard him? How had he gotten so close without making a sound? I called my best friend Carla on the phone. She tried to calm me, suggesting I was imagining things, but I knew better. Babysitting had always felt like a game, a responsibility I could handle, but that night reminded me that vigilance could never be optional. Later that week, I signed up for a self-defense class. I practiced basic moves, held my pepper spray, and imagined scenarios over and over. I wanted to be ready, not just for myself, but for anyone who trusted me to protect them. The peers also decided to install additional security measures. I helped by checking locks, making a list of the windows and doors that could be reinforced. They purchased alarms that sounded immediately in the event of entry and motion sensors for the yard. I felt slightly safer, but I noticed that every sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the squeak of the floorboards, made me jump. I couldn't stop scanning the house, imagining he could return at any moment. Even when I babysat other families, my eyes lingered on dark corners. I learned to trust my instincts, to act on that tiny internal voice that whispers, "Something isn't right." It was exhausting but empowering. I realized that vigilance wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. Weeks later, I returned to the Willow Creek house for a second babysitting job. The parents had installed cameras in the yard and hallways. At first I felt absurd, constantly checking the monitors, but then I remembered the man in the rain, the footprints, the invisible proximity that had terrified me. The twins were themselves again, full of laughter and energy, but I couldn't let my guard down. Every time a shadow passed the window, I instinctively reached for the monitor, making sure it was just a branch or a stray animal. I realized that my fear had evolved into caution, and I welcomed it. I would never let complacency replace responsibility. At night, while reading by the living room lamp, I kept one eye on the cameras. Hours passed uneventfully, but my mind still imagined him, standing silently, waiting. I would never forget that sensation, the weight of being watched and powerless. Months later, I started sharing my experience with other young babysitters. I warned them about trusting instincts, about checking exits and locks, about taking precautions even in the safest-looking neighborhoods. Their wide eyes mirrored the same dawning understanding I had felt that night. I also started practicing mental exercises to manage anxiety. I learned that vigilance was different from fear. It was preparation. I carried a small flashlight and a whistle on every babysitting job, double-checked doors, and made notes of emergency exits. My fear had transformed into a skill I could teach others. Even now, long after that night, whenever I walk past a window or see a shadow in the yard, I feel a twinge of unease. I know that danger can be silent, slow, and patient. That one night at 132 Willow Creek Drive changed me profoundly. It taught me to trust my instincts, to respect caution, and to recognize that vigilance is not overreaction, it's responsibility. I continued babysitting, confident yet alert. I reinforced my boundaries, protected those who depended on me, and stayed aware of the world outside the walls I controlled. The memory of that still man in the rain never fully left me, but it became a reminder that preparation, attention, and courage are the truest forms of protection. Safety requires awareness, preparation, and trust in your instincts. Even the quietest neighborhoods can conceal unseen threats, and responsibility means acting before danger arrives, not after it has already struck. Vigilance and courage are essential tools for protecting yourself and those who depend on you. I had been looking forward to a quiet night alone for weeks. My roommates were away visiting family for the holidays, and for once, I could finally enjoy my little apartment at 19 Hawthorne Street without interruptions. The rain hammered against the windows as I stepped inside, drenched and shivering, grocery bags in hand. I loved the sound of rain when I was inside, cozy with a warm cup of tea and a sketch pad. But tonight it felt heavier somehow, almost too loud, too insistent. The apartment smelled faintly of my roommate's absence. Nothing cooking, no music, no chatter. Even Milo, my small tabby, seemed restless, circling the living room and pawing at the door to the spare bedroom. I laughed nervously, telling myself he was just curious. I had noticed the door to the spare bedroom was slightly ajar, but I assumed I had left it that way. I tried to brush it off, locking the main door behind me and putting away groceries, but a small voice in my head whispered that something was off. I filled the kettle and set it to boil, unpacking vegetables and cereal boxes. That's when I heard it. A faint cough, soft and muffled, coming from the direction of the spare room. My heart stopped. "Hello?" I called, my voice shaking. "Is anyone there?" Silence followed. I checked my phone. It was in the kitchen, just out of reach. The anxiety in my chest tightened. I remembered that only I had keys tonight. No one else was supposed to be here. Clutching a flashlight, I approached the spare room. The closer I got, the stronger the smell became. Damp fabric, stale food, and something metallic faint in the background. My hand shook as I turned the doorknob. Inside, I saw the mattress, blankets, and food wrappers. My stomach dropped. Then I noticed the photos scattered on the floor, images of me in the living room, on the couch, even asleep in my bed. I couldn't move. The intruder had been living there, silently, watching me while I went about my life. I slammed the door shut, locking myself in the living room, and called 911 with trembling fingers. The sound of sirens felt like a lifeline. When the police arrived, they moved methodically, inspecting every corner of the apartment. They confirmed what I had feared. Someone had been hiding in the spare room, sneaking in while I was distracted at work and during late-night study sessions. I walked through the living room again, noticing tiny clues I had missed before. A footprint near the bathroom, dust slightly displaced along the hallway, scratches on the baseboards. The thought that someone had been here, so close to me, made my pulse hammer in my ears. I couldn't sleep that night. Every shadow in the apartment seemed to stretch toward me. Every creak of the floorboard echoed like footsteps. I moved carefully, checking locks, sliding deadbolts, and peeking through peepholes before entering each room. Milo stayed close, circling my legs and hissing at nothing I could see. Even the rain tapping on the windows sounded like someone moving around outside, waiting. By the time morning came, I felt exhausted and raw. I called my landlord again, asking him to confirm that no one had a key I didn't know about. He assured me everything had been accounted for. Still, the sense of vulnerability lingered, growing like a shadow at the edge of my consciousness. I knew I couldn't rely on him or the police to make me feel safe again. Over the next few weeks, I installed additional locks, motion sensors, and cameras inside and outside the apartment. The sense of control helped, but it didn't erase the memory of that night. I kept a small flashlight near my bed, checked the doors before falling asleep, and never left the apartment without triple-checking that every lock was engaged. Even mundane noises, a dripping faucet, the hum of the heater, set my nerves on edge. I noticed my friends' concern when I spoke about it. They offered advice, hugs, and reassurances, but I realized that fear isn't something that disappears when others comfort you. It lingers in small ways. The subtle jump at a sudden sound, the instinct to scan rooms before sitting down. I felt hyper-aware of my surroundings, understanding in a visceral way how fragile personal safety could be. I also became more meticulous with routines. I left lights on at night, even in rooms I wasn't using, and created a system for checking the apartment multiple times before sleeping or leaving. Every step, every habit was a shield. Months passed and life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. I focused on work, sketches, and classes, but I never stopped paying attention. Visitors to my apartment noticed my vigilance, and I learned to balance paranoia with preparedness. Every time I entered an unfamiliar hallway, checked a door, or peeked outside a window, I reminded myself that being cautious isn't weakness, it's awareness. Milo remained a constant companion, his ears swiveling at sounds I would have ignored before. I began journaling obsessively, writing down every small event or sound that unsettled me. The journal became a tool to process fear without letting it control me entirely. Even now, during thunderstorms or when I come home late from the cafe, I feel a faint echo of that first night. The sense of someone being there when no one should be. I know the intruder is gone, but the lesson remains. Independence carries risk. Familiar spaces can be deceiving. Safety is never guaranteed. I take precautions, trust my instincts, and never underestimate the quiet moments when danger can creep in unnoticed. Living alone, I've learned, isn't just about freedom. It's about responsibility, vigilance, and understanding that even ordinary nights can turn into extraordinary lessons about trust, awareness, and courage. True independence requires vigilance, preparation, and trust in your instincts. Safety is fragile, and even the most familiar places can hide threats. Awareness and responsibility are the keys to protecting oneself and maintaining control in uncertain circumstances.